My mother looked my crying 8-year-old daughter in the eye on Christmas Eve and sneered, "You are not my granddaughter. Get out." I did not scream. I did not argue. I just packed our things, held my little girl tight, and sent a single text message to my trust attorney. It said, "Handle them all. By midnight." I had 29 missed calls and a frantic voicemail from my mother begging me to stop. I sent one reply. "You had better start praying. Taskor our tama trampel." Before I tell you exactly how I legally and financially dismantled my own family, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you enjoy stories about standing up for yourself. Drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to the night they made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Valerie. I am 34 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. I track missing money for a living. I expose fraud, unravel complex financial webs, and hold liars accountable. 4 years ago, my husband David passed away suddenly, leaving me a widow and a single mother to Maya. David and I had adopted Maya when she was just a baby. To David and me, she was our entire world. To my mother, Patricia, and my golden child sister, Jessica, Maya was just an outsider who did not share our bloodline. I spent years swallowing their backhanded compliments and passive-aggressive remarks because I wanted Maya to have a family. I wanted to keep the peace. I paid for their lavish dinners. I let Patricia run her business rent-free on commercial land David left behind. And I endured their endless judgment. But keeping the peace only gave them permission to wage war. The true depth of their cruelty finally erupted this past Christmas. I pulled up to Patricia's sprawling suburban estate carrying a stack of carefully wrapped gifts. Maya was practically vibrating with excitement. She was clutching a handmade clay ornament she had spent 3 days painting just for her grandmother. We walked into the grand foyer, where the scent of expensive pine and catered food filled the air. Patricia was holding court by the massive tree, handing out designer gift bags to Jessica's biological children. Jessica stood nearby, sipping champagne and wearing a smug smile. Maya ran up to Patricia, her eyes wide with innocent joy, holding out the little painted ornament. Patricia did not even look down. She just stepped around my daughter to hand a brand new gaming console to her other grandson. Maya stood there, her small hands trembling, completely ignored in a room full of people who were supposed to love her. I felt my chest tighten. The grief of losing David, the years of biting my tongue, it all hardened into solid ice. I stepped forward to intervene. But then Maya accidentally bumped into the side table. A half-empty glass of water tipped over, splashing directly onto Patricia's pristine vintage rug. The room went dead silent. The tires of my modest sedan crunched against the pristine gravel of Patricia's driveway. The house was a sprawling modern colonial in the most exclusive zip code of our city. Every window glowed with warm golden light, projecting an image of the perfect American family to anyone driving past. Inside my car, the heater was blasting, but I already felt cold. Beside me in the passenger seat, Maya was practically vibrating with pure 8-year-old joy. She wore her best velvet holiday dress, the deep green one David and I had bought for her just weeks before he died. In her lap, she carefully guarded a small, slightly lopsided wooden box. She had spent 3 entire afternoons painting it with glitter and bright red reindeer specifically for Patricia. "Do you think Grandma will like it?" "Mom?" Maya asked, her brown eyes wide and hopeful. I swallowed the hard lump in my throat and forced a smile I absolutely did not feel. "She is going to love it, sweetie. You worked so hard on it." I lied. I knew better. I knew exactly who my mother was, but I was still trying to shield Maya from that brutal reality. We walked up the grand stone steps and pushed open the heavy mahogany front door. The scent of cinnamon roasting turkey and expensive perfume hit us immediately. The foyer was chaotic and loud, filled with the sounds of a holiday gathering that I had always been on the edges of. My sister Jessica was lounging on a custom velvet sofa by the towering Christmas tree, sipping a glass of champagne. Her twins Braden and Harper were tearing through the living room, leaving a trail of torn wrapping paper in their wake. Standing near the fireplace was Marcus, Jessica's husband. Marcus was a successful architect, a tall, warm African-American man whose genuine kindness always felt entirely out of place in my family's toxic ecosystem. He was the first one to notice us. His face lit up with a massive smile, and he immediately walked over, sweeping Maya into a huge hug. Look at my favorite niece, Marcus boomed, spinning her around while she giggled. You look like a Christmas princess, Maya. For a brief second, the house actually felt like a home. Then Patricia walked into the room. My mother wore a silk blouse and a severe expression that barely masqueraded as a welcoming smile. She kissed the air near my cheek, entirely ignoring my daughter standing right beside me. Valerie Patricia said, her eyes quickly scanning my simple wool coat with obvious disapproval. You made it. We were just getting to the main gifts. She clapped her hands together, commanding the room's attention with the practiced ease of a woman who fed on authority. Braden Harper, come here, darlings. Grandma has something very special for you. Maya stepped forward eagerly, clutching her painted wooden box, assuming she was included in the summons. I watched my little girl stand at the edge of the plush white rug, her face glowing with anticipation. Patricia reached under the massive, professionally decorated tree and pulled out 2 enormous boxes wrapped in imported silver paper. She handed the first one to Braden. He ripped it open, tossing the silver paper onto the floor, revealing a high-end virtual reality gaming headset. Harper received a second box, squealing, as she uncovered a designer smartwatch and a brand new tablet. The twins did not say thank you. They simply ran off to the den to play with their new toys. Patricia beamed at them, her chest swelling with pride. Maya was still standing there, holding her handmade gift out slightly. Her smile was beginning to falter just a fraction as she looked from the empty space under the tree to Patricia's face. I felt my chest tighten, a familiar, suffocating pressure. I had spent my entire life standing exactly where Maya was standing right now, waiting for a scrap of affection that was never going to come. I stepped closer to my daughter, placing a protective hand on her small shoulder. Mom, I said, keeping my voice carefully level. I believe Maya has something she wants to give you. Patricia finally turned her gaze downward. She looked at the glittery wooden box in Maya's hands as if it were a piece of trash that had somehow blown into her immaculate living room. She did not reach out to take it. She just offered a tight, patronizing sigh. Oh, how quaint, Patricia muttered, turning away to pick up her wine glass. Put it on the side table over there. I will find a place for it later. Maya lowered her hands, the light completely leaving her eyes. She looked up at me confused and hurt, trying to understand why her grandmother did not want the gift she had worked so hard to make. My blood ran cold. As a forensic accountant, my entire career is built on identifying discrepancies. I track missing money, I expose corporate fraud, and I hold liars accountable. I deal in hard facts and undeniable proof. Standing in that lavish living room, the discrepancy was glaringly obvious. The emotional deficit was massive. I was looking at a ledger of my own life, realizing I had been subsidizing their cruelty with my compliance. Jessica walked over, her champagne flute clicking against her diamond ring. She looked at Maya, then at me, her lips curling into a cruel sneer. You know, Valerie, Jessica said, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. Mom and I were just talking about your finances the other day. We really do not understand your choices. I stiffened. My finances are none of your business, Jessica. They are when you are acting this irresponsibly. Patricia chimed in, stepping back to join her golden child. My mother looked me up and down, her eyes flashing with a sickening mixture of pity and disgust. David worked incredibly hard for that life insurance policy he left you. He was a brilliant man. And you are just blowing it all on expensive private schools and tutoring for a child that does not even share his DNA. It is a complete waste of resources. I felt the air leave my lungs. Maya shifted uncomfortably against my leg. Old enough to understand the tone, even if she did not fully grasp the cruel words. Marcus immediately stepped forward, his face hardening with anger. Patricia, that is completely out of line, Marcus said, placing himself between Jessica and me. Maya is her daughter. You do not talk about family like that. Oh, please, Marcus, Jessica snapped at her husband, rolling her eyes. Do not be so dramatic. We are just being practical. Valerie is playing house with a stranger's kid, and she expects us to treat her like a real granddaughter. Blood is blood. You cannot just buy a family with David's money. Every single word was a calculated strike designed to break me down. They wanted me to yell. They wanted me to cause a scene so they could label me the crazy, unstable widow. For years, I had swallowed their poison because David had loved them, and I thought enduring their cruelty was the only way to keep some semblance of family intact for Maya. I thought my silence bought us peace, but looking at my daughter's tear-filled eyes, I realized my silence had only bought them a punching bag. For a single agonizing second, the only sound in the entire house was the soft dripping of water from the edge of the mahogany side table. The droplets hit the intricate woven patterns of Patricia's prized Persian rug, seeping into the expensive wool. It was just water. It was a harmless accident caused by a nervous 8-year-old girl who was simply trying to find a place to set down a gift that had just been rejected. In any normal family, an accident like this would have been met with a paper towel and a reassuring smile. But we were not a normal family. I watched the realization wash over Maya's face. Her small hands flew to her mouth, and her eyes darted up to her grandmother. "I am so sorry," Grandma Maya whispered, her voice trembling so badly it broke on the last word. "I will clean it up. I promise I will clean it up right now." She dropped to her knees frantically, trying to wipe the damp spot with the sleeve of her velvet holiday dress. She was treating her best piece of clothing like a rag, just to appease a woman who had never loved her. I moved to grab her to pull my daughter up from the floor and tell her to stop, but Patricia moved faster. Patricia did not reach for a towel. She reached for Maya. Her perfectly manicured hand shot out her acrylic nails, digging sharply into Maya's small shoulder. She yanked my daughter upward with a force that made me gasp. Maya stumbled backward, letting out a sharp cry of surprise. "Do not touch her," I commanded, stepping between them with my heart hammering against my ribs. But Patricia was not looking at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. All the polished elegance she projected to her country club friends vanished, replaced by a vicious cruelty that she usually reserved for closed doors. "Look at what you have done," Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity. "You clumsy, careless little brat. Do you have any idea how much this rug costs? It is worth more than your entire life." Maya flinched as if she had been physically struck. She instinctively pulled her arms tight to her chest, still clutching that glittery painted wooden box she had spent 3 days making. That little box was her olive branch. It was her desperate attempt to buy the affection she saw her cousins receiving so freely. Patricia noticed the box. Her eyes locked onto it, and her lips curled into a sneer of absolute disgust. "You bring your trash into my home," she spat, taking a step toward my terrified daughter. "You ruin my things, and you expect me to pretend I want whatever garbage you threw together. Bow." "Yahtzee." Before I could intercept her, Patricia snatched the wooden box right out of Maya's hands. Maya let out a small, desperate sob, reaching out instinctively to get it back. But she was too small, and Patricia was too fast. My mother turned on her heel and marched directly toward the heavy stainless steel trash can sitting near the kitchen entryway. She did not hesitate. She did not look back. She lifted the lid and dropped the handmade ornament inside. It hit the bottom with a hollow, echoing thud that sounded like a gunshot in the dead, silent room. Maya broke down completely. Her shoulders heaved as she covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably into her palms. She had poured her entire heart into that gift, and the woman she was desperately trying to call her grandmother had just thrown it away like a piece of rotting food. I felt a surge of adrenaline so violent it made my vision blur. I stepped toward Patricia, my hands balled into fists, ready to drag my mother out of her own house. But Patricia spun around to face us, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a venom I will never forget. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Maya. "You are not my granddaughter," Patricia screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and completely silencing the holiday music playing in the background. "You are nothing to me. You do not share my blood. You do not belong in this family. You are just a mistake David left behind. Now get out of my house." The words struck with the force of a physical blow. The absolute finality of her statement hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. And then from the other side of the living room, a sound cut through Maya's crying. It was a laugh. I turned my head and saw my sister Jessica leaning against the mantelpiece. She was swirling the champagne in her glass, her eyes locked on my sobbing daughter, and she was actually laughing. It was a cold, mocking sound, a sound that confirmed she was entirely complicit in this abuse. She was enjoying the spectacle. She was relishing in the fact that her children were the chosen ones, while mine was being discarded like trash. That laugh shattered whatever illusion of family I had left. "Stop it!" A deep voice thundered across the room. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped directly between Patricia and Maya. It was Marcus. Jessica's African-American husband had crossed the room in 3 massive strides, his athletic frame casting a protective shadow over my child. His face was set in a rigid expression of absolute disgust. He stood over 6 feet tall, and he used every inch of his frame to physically block Patricia's path to my daughter. He turned his broad back to his mother-in-law, completely shielding Maya from her view. He dropped down to one knee right there on the pristine hardwood floor, ruining the crease of his expensive suit trousers, and gently placed his large hands on Maya's trembling shoulders. "Hey, look at me," Marcus said softly, his voice completely stripping away the anger he had just displayed. His tone was incredibly gentle, the kind of voice a father uses to comfort a terrified child. "You are a wonderful girl, Maya. You did nothing wrong. It was just an accident. Do you hear me? You are perfect, exactly as you are." He looked up at me, his dark eyes filled with profound sorrow and a silent, desperate apology for the monsters he had married into. He stood back up, turning his imposing frame back toward Patricia and his wife. "What is wrong with you people?" Marcus demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble that commanded immediate attention. "She is a child who made you a gift out of love, and you treat her like this." Jessica scoffed from the fireplace, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, do not play the hero, Marcus. She ruined a $10,000 rug. Mom is right. She is not one of us." Marcus turned his gaze to his wife, and the look of sheer disappointment on his face made Jessica physically take a step backward. "She is 1,000 times better than any of us." Marcus shot back, his voice thick with contempt. "If this is what being part of this family means, then you should all be utterly ashamed of yourselves." I stood there, watching this man, the only person in this entire mansion with a shred of basic human decency, protect my child when her own grandmother would not. He had diffused the immediate physical threat, placing himself as a barrier against their cruelty. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick enough to choke on. The line had not just been crossed. It had been incinerated. There was no going back from this. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or beg for an apology. That is what Patricia wanted. She wanted a dramatic performance, a hysterical daughter she could easily dismiss and mock to her wealthy friends. Instead, I felt a profound and chilling clarity wash over me, freezing the years of desperate longing for my mother's approval into solid ice. I stepped forward, wrapped my arms tightly around Maya, and scooped her up from the floor. She buried her tear-streaked face into my neck, her small body shaking with quiet, devastated sobs. I held her close, pressing a firm kiss to her hair, letting her know she was safe. I turned to Marcus. He was still standing there, his jaw clenched, radiating a protective fury that I would never forget. "Thank you, Marcus." I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Thank you for being the only real family she had in this room today." Marcus gave me a single tight nod, stepping aside to clear a path to the grand mahogany door. I turned back to look at Patricia one last time. She was standing by the fireplace, adjusting her silk blouse, attempting to look victorious, but failing to hide the slight flicker of unease in her eyes. She expected me to crumble. Instead, I stared dead into her eyes. I let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds, letting her feel the absolute emptiness of my gaze. "Enjoy your rug, Patricia," I said softly. "It is the only thing in this house you actually own." I did not wait for her to process the threat. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving the toxic, suffocating air of that mansion behind us forever. The crisp winter air hit us the moment we stepped off the porch. I strapped Maya into her car seat in the back of my modest sedan, gently wiping her damp cheeks with my thumbs. "You are my daughter, Maya," I told her firmly, making sure she looked right at me. "You are my entire world. Do not ever let anyone make you feel like you do not belong." She nodded weakly, her small hands resting empty on her velvet dress. I closed her door and got into the driver's seat. The heater kicked on, filling the car with warmth, but my hands gripping the steering wheel were completely cold. I sat in the driveway for a long moment, staring at the glowing windows of the estate. For 5 years, I had let them walk all over me. I had subsidized their lavish lifestyle, turning a blind eye to their greed because I thought I owed them my loyalty. That loyalty ended tonight. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I did not call a friend to vent. I did not cry on my steering wheel. I opened my messages and pulled up the contact for my trust attorney, a ruthless man who had spent the last 2 years begging me to cut my family off. I typed out a single, precise message. Activate the revocation clause. Handle them all. I hit send, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb. They thought they had just thrown away a helpless widow. They had no idea they had just declared war on a forensic accountant, holding the keys to their entire financial kingdom. The drive back to our home had been agonizingly quiet. I had carried Maya up the stairs to her bedroom, carefully removing her green velvet holiday dress and changing her into her favorite soft pajamas. I sat in the velvet rocking chair in the corner of her room for hours, long after she had finally cried herself to sleep. The soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing filled the dark space, illuminated only by the faint amber glow of a street lamp slipping through the blinds. Every time she shifted under her heavy quilt, her small hands clutched the edge of the blanket as if she were trying to anchor herself. My chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean of every lingering illusion I had ever harbored about my biological family. I am a forensic accountant. I have spent a decade tracing missing millions, auditing corrupt executives, and finding the exact point where a lie intersects with a bank ledger. I look at life through the lens of debits and credits, investments and deficits. For 34 years, I had poured every ounce of my emotional capital into a family that viewed my daughter and me as nothing more than worthless liabilities. I looked down at my phone resting silently in my palm. The text message to my trust attorney had been delivered and read. The gears of their absolute financial destruction were already turning. I just needed to wait for the sun to rise to finish the job. Suddenly, the phone vibrated against my hand, shattering the midnight silence. The harsh blue light of the screen illuminated the dark nursery. I quickly pressed my thumb against the silence button so the ringing would not wake Maya. I glanced at the caller identification. It was Marcus. It was exactly 12:14 in the morning. A call from my brother-in-law at this hour meant the shockwaves of my departure were still rattling the walls of my mother's estate. I stood up silently, walked out of Maya's bedroom, and pulled her door shut until it latched with a soft click. I moved down the hallway into my own dimly lit kitchen before sliding my finger across the screen to answer. Valerie Marcus said the moment the line connected. His voice sounded awful. It was stripped of its usual booming warmth, reduced to a raspy, strained whisper. It sounded like he was standing outside in the freezing cold. I could hear the faint whistle of the winter wind blowing against his phone microphone. "I am so incredibly sorry," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I am so sorry for what happened tonight. What Patricia did to Maya, what Jessica said to you. It was unforgivable. It made me absolutely sick to my stomach. You and Maya did not deserve any of that." I leaned against the cool granite of my kitchen island, staring out the window into my dark backyard. "You do not need to apologize for them, Marcus," I said, keeping my tone level and calm. "You were the only person in that house who treated my daughter like a human being today. I will never forget that. You protected her when I was too stunned to move, but their cruelty is their own. You cannot carry the weight of their sins." I know Marcus sighed heavily, a sound of profound exhaustion. "I know I cannot fix them. But Valerie, that is not the only reason I'm calling you so late. Something is very wrong here. Something is completely falling apart and I do not know who else to talk to." My professional instincts immediately overrode my exhaustion. As a forensic accountant, I know that desperation always leaves a specific kind of footprint. Desperate people move too fast. They make aggressive, uncharacteristic demands. The panic in Marcus's voice was a glaring red flag, waving furiously in the dark. "What happened after I left?" I asked, my voice dropping into a focused, analytical register. "Tell me exactly what happened." Marcus took a shaky breath. "After you drove away, Patricia completely lost her mind. She started screaming at the caterers, yelling at the guests. Everyone left early. It was an absolute disaster. But that is not the worst part. The second the house was empty, Jessica dragged me into Patricia's private home office. They completely ambushed me, Valerie. They locked the door, and Jessica slammed a stack of legal documents onto the mahogany desk. She demanded that I sign them right then and there. I stood up straight, my grip tightening on the phone. "What kind of documents, Marcus?" "Equity transfers," he replied, the disbelief still raw in his throat. Jessica wanted me to sign over 50% of the voting equity in my architectural firm directly into a holding company controlled by Patricia. She said it was an absolute emergency. She told me I had to do it to save Patricia's failing estate. She claimed Patricia is facing a massive liquidity crisis, and if I did not pledge my firm's assets as collateral, they were going to lose the mansion, the cars, everything. My mind raced, processing the data at lightning speed. Save Patricia's failing estate. The words echoed in my head, bouncing against everything I knew to be true. It was a complete logical impossibility. My late husband David had left a massive commercial property in a heavily protected trust. That land generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in passive revenue every single quarter. Patricia's luxury event planning business operated on that exact land, completely rent-free, because I had allowed it. Between the business revenue and the absence of overhead, Patricia should have been swimming in excess capital. Her estate should have been an impenetrable fortress of wealth. There is absolutely no way Patricia is broke, I told Marcus, my mind rapidly connecting the invisible dots. I let her operate on David's commercial land without charging her a dime in lease payments for 5 years. She has virtually zero operational overhead. Where is all her capital going? That is exactly what I asked them, Marcus said, his voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and rising anger. I told Jessica I was not signing away the company I built from the ground up without a full audit of her mother's finances. Valerie, you should have seen their faces. They completely panicked. Jessica started crying, telling me I was abandoning my family. Patricia started threatening to ruin my reputation in the city. They were acting like cornered animals. They are hiding a massive financial black hole, Valerie. I know they are. I just cannot prove it yet. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, deep breath as the reality of the situation locked into place. They were not just cruel. They were utterly desperate. And desperate people always leave a trail of reckless financial crimes in their wake. They were trying to use Marcus as a human shield to absorb whatever catastrophic debt they had secretly accumulated. They needed his clean, legitimate business to launder their failures. Do not sign a single piece of paper, Marcus. I commanded, my voice entirely devoid of fear or hesitation. Do not agree to any collateral pledges. Do not let them access your business accounts. You need to lock down your personal credit immediately. I will not sign anything, he promised firmly. But Valerie, what are they doing? What kind of trouble are they actually in? I looked out into the darkness of my backyard, a cold, calculated calm washing over my entire body. The sadness over the ruined Christmas was completely gone. The forensic accountant was fully awake, and I was ready to dismantle them piece by piece. I do not know yet, Marcus, I said softly, a dangerous edge creeping into my voice. But I know exactly how to find out. I hung up the phone with Marcus and stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, letting the silence of the house wash over me. The faint mechanical hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the entire room. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, echoing in my ears. I walked back down the hallway, pausing briefly outside Maya's door to listen to her steady, peaceful breathing before slipping into my home office. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me, turning the deadbolt with a decisive click. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat down at my expansive desk and pressed the power button on my computer tower. The dual monitors flared to life, casting a harsh, cold blue glow across my face. I am a forensic accountant. My entire professional life is completely dedicated to finding the absolute truth hidden beneath thick layers of corporate deceit. I track offshore accounts, I unravel massive embezzlement schemes, and I trace the invisible lines of digital money that corrupt people try so desperately to bury. But tonight, I was not auditing a nameless, faceless corporation. I was auditing my own mother. I opened my specialized forensic accounting software, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with a practiced, relentless rhythm. I needed to understand exactly how Patricia could possibly be facing a sudden liquidity crisis. It defied every basic principle of mathematics and business logic. Patricia ran a highly exclusive luxury event planning company. She catered exclusively to the wealthiest families in the city, organizing massive galas, elite charity balls, and extravagant million-dollar weddings. But the true secret to her perceived success was not her business acumen or her high society connections. It was the land she operated on. 5 years ago, before my husband David passed away, he had strategically purchased a prime piece of commercial real estate. It was a massive, beautiful property right in the heart of the most lucrative business district in the state. David was brilliant with investments. He placed that property into an ironclad family trust, naming me as the sole managing trustee and Maya as the ultimate beneficiary. When David died, Patricia had come to me crying about her business desperately struggling with lease payments at her old office space. I was actively grieving, I was exhausted, and I just wanted my family to finally love me. So I made the absolute biggest financial mistake of my entire life. I allowed my mother to move her entire business operation onto David's commercial property, absolutely rent-free. For 5 entire years, Patricia had operated a high-end luxury business with zero overhead costs for her physical location. No monthly rent, no commercial property taxes, no expensive maintenance fees. I paid for every single one of those expenses out of my own pocket to keep the peace. By every logical financial metric, she should have been sitting on a massive mountain of surplus capital. Her estate should have been generating staggering profit margins year after year. There was absolutely no rational reason she would urgently need Marcus to sign over half of his successful architectural firm to save her, unless the pristine, wealthy image she projected to the world was a complete and total fabricated lie. I securely logged into the encrypted portal for the county clerk's office, pulling up the public property records for the commercial estate. I needed to see exactly what Patricia had been doing in the dark while I was distracted by my grief. The database loaded agonizingly slowly, the spinning icon on the screen mocking my rising anxiety. I pulled the annual tax assessments first. They were perfectly normal, all paid on time by me, directly from the secure trust account. Then I navigated to the encumbrances and liens section of the database. I fully expected to see a blank page. David had bought the commercial property in cash. We owned it free and clear without a single cent of debt. There was absolutely no mortgage attached to that land. The page finally loaded. A line of thick, bold text appeared in the database that made the breath completely leave my lungs. It was a recorded deed of trust attached to a commercial loan. My eyes darted across the glowing screen, scanning the cold, hard data. The loan was for $2.5 million. I sat perfectly still, staring at the numbers until my vision blurred. $2.5 million. Someone had deliberately taken out a massive commercial mortgage against the property held securely in David's trust. The exact property that was legally supposed to secure Maya's entire future. My hands began to shake violently. A cold, terrifying numbness started at the tips of my fingers and rapidly spread up my arms, gripping my chest. This was simply not possible. A major financial institution does not just hand over $2.5 million without rigorous verification. They require extensive corporate documentation. They require hard collateral. And most importantly, they require the verified notarized signature of the legal trustee. They require my specific signature. I opened a new browser tab, my keystrokes growing frantic and aggressive. I accessed the digital archives of the lending institution listed directly on the county record. I knew the secure backdoor channels for pulling original loan origination documents. I completely bypassed the standard customer service portals and used my professional forensic credentials to request the raw scanned files of the loan agreement. The security system prompted me for strict dual-factor authentication. I verified my identity and waited in the agonizing silence. My chest felt like it was being mercilessly crushed in a steel vise. The emotional betrayal I had experienced at the Christmas dinner just hours earlier felt like a minor inconvenience compared to the massive gaping wound that was opening up right in front of me. This was not just a toxic mother endlessly favoring her golden child. This was premeditated financial sabotage. A sharp notification pinged on my monitor. The requested documents had been securely delivered to my encrypted inbox. I quickly opened the heavy PDF file containing the 80-page commercial loan agreement. I furiously scrolled past the standard boilerplate legalese, past the complex amortization schedules, and the variable interest rate definitions. I was hunting for one specific page, the final signature block. I scrolled down relentlessly until I reached page 79. There it was, the execution page. I stared at the bright screen, my blood running completely cold in my veins. There, on the designated line for the sole trustee of the estate, was my name, Valerie Ann, written in dark blue ink. But it was not my handwriting. The loops on the letters were far too sharp, the slant completely wrong. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the digital ink with my wide eyes. The letter V was aggressively stylized. The letter A finished with an exaggerated dramatic flourish. I knew that handwriting intimately. I had seen that exact same arrogant flourish on thousands of birthday cards, grocery lists, and passive-aggressive sticky notes my entire life. It was Jessica's handwriting. The brutal reality of the crime crashed over me with the destructive force of a runaway freight train. My mother and my sister had actively conspired to steal from me. They had physically gone into a bank, sat across from a loan officer, and confidently presented themselves as the legal representatives of my trust. Jessica had picked up a pen and deliberately forged my legal signature on federal banking documents. Patricia had undoubtedly used her high society connections and her falsely inflated reputation to bypass the standard identity verification protocols. They had stolen $2.5 million against the land that David had worked his entire life to buy for our daughter. I leaned back in my desk chair, the heavy leather creaking loudly in the quiet room. I pressed the heels of my hands deep into my eyes, trying to stop the entire room from spinning. The scattered pieces of the puzzle were slamming together with sickening precision. They had completely drained the $2.5 million. Patricia had probably used it to desperately maintain the illusion of her immense wealth, funding her exclusive country club memberships, her luxury cars, her designer wardrobe, and Jessica's endless demands for cash. They had been living like royalty on stolen money for years, but commercial loans have strict, unforgiving repayment schedules. They have massive balloon payments and aggressive compounding interest rates. The money was completely gone. They had spent every last dime, and now the bank was finally coming to collect. That was exactly why they were cornering Marcus. That was exactly why Patricia was suddenly facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis on Christmas Eve. The bank was actively threatening to foreclose on the commercial property, and if they did, a full federal investigation would be launched immediately. The bank would automatically contact me, the legal trustee, to notify me of the foreclosure. Patricia and Jessica knew perfectly well that the exact moment I received that notice, their entire web of lies would instantly disintegrate. They needed Marcus to sign over his equity tonight so they could forcefully liquidate his business and use his clean, legitimate capital to cover the massive missing funds before the bank caught on. They were entirely willing to completely destroy an innocent man's life, his successful business, and his entire future just to cover up their own egregious felonies. I felt a sudden violent wave of physical nausea. I pushed my chair back abruptly and paced across the small office, my mind processing the sheer staggering magnitude of their depravity. They had looked Maya directly in the eye tonight and coldly told her she was not part of the family. They had discarded her like absolute garbage in front of everyone. Meanwhile, they were actively stealing the very foundation of her financial security in the dark. They were not just toxic relatives. They were remorseless criminals. They were greedy predators who had disguised themselves as family for decades. I walked back to the desk and planted my hands flat on the wooden surface, glaring at the forged signature on the screen. The grief and the desperate, pathetic longing for my mother's love that had controlled me for 34 years completely evaporated. It was entirely burned away by a righteous, furious clarity. Patricia had always told me I was not special. She had constantly treated me like a compliant, naive fool who would just silently absorb whatever abuse they handed out. But they had made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They completely forgot what I do for a living. They forgot that I know exactly how to dismantle a massive financial empire brick by stolen brick. I reached for a legal pad and grabbed a red pen. I was no longer a grieving widow trying to keep the peace. I was a forensic accountant, and I had just found the smoking gun. My red pen hovered over the legal pad, but I could not bring myself to write another word. The forged mortgage on the commercial property was a massive catastrophic blow, but it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. As a forensic accountant, I know that when someone crosses the line into federal fraud, they rarely stop at just one crime. Greed is a disease that spreads rapidly, infecting every accessible resource. If Patricia and Jessica were desperate enough to forge my signature for a $2.5 million commercial loan, what else had they compromised? What else had they touched while I was blinded by grief and a desperate need for family harmony? A sickening thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. The commercial trust was not the only financial vehicle David had established before he died. There was one other account, an account I had explicitly instructed Patricia to help me set up through her elite private banking connections back when I still believed she had my best interests at heart. It was Maya's college fund. David had wanted to ensure that no matter what happened to us, Maya would have her entire education fully funded. We had deposited $300,000 into a legally protected education savings account. It was supposed to be completely untouchable, but Patricia had the account numbers. She had helped me navigate the initial paperwork using her premier wealth management broker. My hands began to shake all over again as I pulled up the private banking portal on my second monitor. I typed in my secure credentials, my heart hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. The screen loaded, transitioning to the main account dashboard. I prayed to whoever was listening that I was just being paranoid. I prayed that even Patricia and Jessica had a moral boundary they would not cross when it came to a child. But the moment the account balances populated on the screen, my entire world shattered for the second time that night. The balance was not $300,000. The balance was $24,000. I stared at the glowing numbers, unable to process the visual information. $276,000 was completely gone. I clicked on the transaction history, my breathing turning shallow and rapid. The ledger populated a long, damning list of outbound wire transfers. They had not taken it all at once. They had been bleeding my daughter's future dry month by month for the past 2 years. There were dozens of small transfers disguised as legitimate educational expenses or administrative consulting fees. But the most recent transactions were the most aggressive. Just 3 days ago, there was a pending wire transfer for $140,000 and another pending transfer for $65,000, scheduled to clear the very next morning. They were trying to drain the very last drop of Maya's security right before the holidays. My blood boiled with a protective maternal rage so intense it made my vision blur. This was not just theft. This was an act of pure, unadulterated evil. They had looked my 8-year-old daughter in the eye tonight, sneered at her, threw her handmade gift in the trash, and told her she was not part of the family, all while they were actively robbing her blind. I needed to know exactly where every single penny of that money was going. I opened my specialized forensic tracing tools, bypassing the standard user interface, to pull the raw routing data from the pending transfers. I traced the $65,000 wire first. The routing number belonged to a massive national credit card issuer. I dug deeper, pulling the specific account identifier. It was a platinum reward credit card registered directly to Jessica. My sister had racked up $65,000 in secret credit card debt, buying designer clothes, luxury vacations, and expensive dinners to maintain her fake high society image. And she was using my 8-year-old daughter's college money to bail herself out. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking, but the second transfer was even worse. I routed the massive $140,000 wire. The destination account was not a bank. It was an elite luxury auto dealership located in the wealthiest district of the city. I recognized the name immediately. It was the exact same dealership where Jessica had been test driving vehicles for the past month, boasting on social media about upgrading her lifestyle. She was buying a brand new custom-ordered Porsche. She was funding her luxury sports car with the exact money David had specifically set aside to pay for Maya's university tuition. I felt physically sick. The sheer magnitude of their entitlement was incomprehensible. They truly believed that because Maya was adopted, because she did not share their blood, she was fundamentally less than human. They believed her resources, her future, her very survival were completely theirs to exploit. Patricia and Jessica saw Maya as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and David's money. They had manufactured the entire liquidity crisis. There was no failing estate. There was only their endless, bottomless greed. They had burned through the $2.5 million fraudulent commercial loan to fund their lavish lifestyles, and when the bank finally demanded payment, they panicked. They drained Maya's college fund to desperately cover their personal debts and buy luxury cars to keep up their wealthy facade, while simultaneously trying to force Marcus to sign over his architectural firm to take the ultimate financial fall. They were orchestrating a massive coordinated financial collapse, and they intended to leave Marcus, Maya, and me completely buried under the rubble. I sat in the dark glow of my computer monitors, the harsh light illuminating the tears of absolute fury streaming down my face. I had spent 7 years trying to make these women love me. I had spent 7 years making myself small, working quietly in the background, paying their bills, tolerating their insults, and desperately hoping that one day they would look at Maya and see the beautiful, brilliant child that David and I saw. But you cannot negotiate with predators. You cannot buy love from people who view you as prey. The emotional betrayal I had suffered in Patricia's living room just hours ago had completely mutated. It was no longer just a painful family dispute over a ruined Christmas dinner. It was federal wire fraud. It was bank fraud. It was identity theft and grand larceny. They had crossed a legal line that could never be uncrossed. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. The sorrow was gone. The grief was gone. The desperate daughter who just wanted her mother's approval was completely dead. In her place was a fiercely protective mother and a forensic accountant holding irrefutable proof of multiple federal crimes. I realized in that moment that I could not just cut them off. I could not just freeze the accounts and walk away. If I did that, they would simply rebrand themselves as victims. They would spin a narrative to their wealthy country club friends about how I was a cruel, ungrateful daughter who abandoned them in their time of need. They would try to manipulate Marcus into staying, they would try to find another way to steal, and they would never ever stop coming after Maya and me. Simply walking away was no longer an option. I had to systematically, permanently, and completely destroy them. I had to dismantle their entire fake empire so thoroughly that they would never be able to hurt another human being again. I needed to trap them in their own web of lies and let the federal government do the rest. I picked up my phone and opened my text messages. I navigated to Marcus's contact. He was the only innocent person left in that house, and I needed him on my side if I was going to pull this off. I typed a quick, secure message. Marcus, meet me at the downtown diner on 4th Avenue at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring any financial documents Jessica asked you to sign. Do not tell anyone where you are going. We have a lot of work to do. I hit send and watched the message mark as delivered. I turned back to my computer monitors and began compiling the evidence into a secure encrypted dossier. I was going to let Patricia and Jessica believe they had won. I was going to let them think they had successfully stolen Maya's future and outsmarted the entire world. Because the higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. The neon sign of the downtown diner buzzed with a harsh fluorescent hum, casting long distorted shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. It was exactly 7 in the morning. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, industrial bleach, and burnt toast, a sharp contrast to the suffocating luxury of Patricia's estate. I sat in the furthest corner booth facing the door with my hands wrapped tightly around a thick ceramic mug. The heat of the ceramic grounded me, keeping my mind razor sharp. I had not slept a single minute. I had spent the entire night tracing fraudulent wire transfers, pulling property deeds, and compiling an ironclad dossier of absolute financial ruin. Now that dossier sat on the sticky table right in front of me, perfectly aligned and waiting. The heavy glass door swung open, letting in a blast of freezing Seattle rain. Marcus walked inside. Even exhausted, he carried himself with an inherent dignity. He was a brilliant African-American architect who had fought tooth and nail against every systemic barrier to build a highly respected firm from absolute scratch. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat, but his shoulders were slumped, and the deep lines around his dark eyes betrayed a night of pure torment. He spotted me in the back corner and walked over his footsteps, heavy and deliberate. He slid into the vinyl booth across from me, bringing the damp, cold air with him. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not bother ordering a coffee. His eyes immediately locked onto the thick manila folder resting between us. You said you knew what they were doing, he began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely carried over the sound of the diner radio. You said you had proof, Valerie. Tell me you have something that makes this nightmare make sense. I looked at my brother-in-law, feeling a profound wave of sympathy. He was a genuinely good man who had walked straight into a den of incredibly wealthy, incredibly toxic predators. I placed my hand flat on top of the dossier. I do not have anything that will make this make sense, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any comforting sugarcoating. There is no sense in what they have done. There is only greed. But I do have the exact anatomy of their crimes. I need you to brace yourself because what I am about to show you is going to destroy the reality you thought you were living in. Marcus swallowed hard, his jaw muscles flexing tightly. Show me, he commanded. I slid the heavy folder across the table. He opened the cover. The first document was the forged commercial loan agreement. I watched his eyes track across the page, absorbing the staggering $2.5 million figure and zeroing in on the forged signature at the bottom. I explained exactly how Patricia and Jessica had illegally leveraged the trust David left for Maya. I watched the shock register on his face as I turned to the next section detailing the systematic draining of my 8-year-old daughter's legally protected college fund to pay for Jessica's secret platinum credit cards and her custom-ordered Porsche. They are monsters, Marcus whispered, staring at the bank routing numbers in absolute horror. To steal from a grieving widow is one thing, but to rob a child, to rob Maya. He shook his head, his hands clenching into tight fists on the table. This is why they needed my equity. They blew through your trust money, and now the bank is demanding repayment. They needed my firm as collateral to save themselves from a federal fraud indictment. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second before delivering the ultimate fatal blow. That is only half the story, Marcus, I said, softly leaning forward. They did not just plan to use your firm as future collateral. They have already been using it as their private ATM for the past 3 years. Marcus froze. His dark eyes locked onto mine, the ambient noise of the diner completely fading away. What are you talking about, Valerie? He asked, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. I reached across the table and turned to the final highly indexed section of the dossier. Turn to page 42, I instructed. He turned the pages, his fingers trembling slightly. When he reached the designated page, he found a comprehensive spreadsheet I had compiled using my forensic access to regional banking networks. Marcus, you gave Jessica administrative access to your architectural firm's payroll and vendor management software when you got married because you trusted her to handle the internal bookkeeping. Yes, he replied, his voice tight. She wanted to help. She said it would take the administrative burden off my shoulders so I could focus entirely on designing and acquiring new clients. She was not helping you, I stated bluntly, pointing to a series of highlighted outbound wire transfers on the page. She was bleeding you dry. Look at the vendor payment logs. For 36 months, Jessica has been authorizing recurring payments to a third-party logistics and consulting firm called Apex Management Solutions. She categorized these payments as necessary software licensing fees and external design consultation retainers. Marcus stared at the ledger, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. Apex Management, he repeated, reading the vendor name out loud. I have never contracted any firm by that name. I have never approved these expenditures. He looked at the monthly totals. $10,000 here, $15,000 there. It added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars completely siphoned out of his operating budget. Where did this money go? I flipped the page, revealing the corporate registration documents I had pulled from the state database. Apex Management Solutions is a registered LLC. I explained, my voice cold and surgical. It is a shell company, a financial ghost. And if you look at the registered managing director of that shell company, you will see a very familiar name. Marcus looked down at the state registration form. His eyes traced the bold black ink identifying the sole proprietor of the LLC, Patricia Carver, my mother. I watched the man's heart break in real time right across the table from me. The devastation hit him in brutal, agonizing waves. He had loved Jessica with everything he had. He had worked 80-hour weeks drafting blueprints, managing construction sites, battling zoning boards, all to provide a luxurious, beautiful life for his wife and his twins. He thought they were building a legacy. Instead, he had been chained to a parasite. Jessica had played the role of the loving, supportive wife, pouring his coffee in the morning and kissing him goodbye, all while secretly logging into his accounts and funneling the lifeblood of his business directly into her mother's offshore holding companies. His entire marriage was nothing but a highly coordinated, meticulously executed financial scam. They had preyed on his trust, his love, and his incredible work ethic. For a long, agonizing minute, Marcus could not speak. He just stared at the documents, his broad chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was suffocating. They had not just stolen his money, they had stolen his reality. They had looked at a brilliant, hard-working African-American man and seen nothing but a lucrative target to fund their fake white picket fence suburban aristocracy. "I am so sorry, Marcus," I said quietly, allowing a trace of genuine empathy to soften my tone. "I know exactly how this feels. To realize the people you love only see you as a resource to be consumed and discarded." Marcus closed his eyes. When he finally opened them, the profound, heartbreaking grief had completely vanished. It was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifying anger. His dark eyes were absolute ice. The warmth and gentle kindness that defined Marcus the father and Marcus the architect were completely locked away. This was a man who had realized he was standing in a war zone, and he was finally ready to fight back. He slowly, deliberately closed the heavy manila folder and rested his large hands on top of it. He looked across the table at me, his jaw set with lethal determination. "They think I am a fool," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "They think because I love my children and because I try to be a decent man that I will just absorb this. They think they can bleed my business dry, steal your daughter's future, and then manipulate me into taking the final fall so they can walk away clean." "They do not just think it, Marcus," I replied, matching his lethal tone. "They are absolutely counting on it. Patricia has a fake buyer lined up for the commercial property. She plans to liquidate the land on New Year's Eve, take the cash, and flee, leaving you legally bound to the failing corporate entity to face the federal fraud charges alone." Marcus let out a dark, humorless laugh that held absolutely no joy. "Not today," he said, leaning forward, his eyes burning with righteous fury. "I built my firm with my own 2 hands, Valerie. I will burn it to the ash before I let them take another single dime from my children's mouths. Tell me exactly what we need to do." I smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. I reached across the small, sticky table and extended my hand. "We do not just cut them off, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We give them exactly what they want. We let them think they have completely won. We hand them the rope, and we let them tie the knot themselves." Marcus reached out and gripped my hand. His handshake was firm, solid, and absolutely unbreakable. It was a silent, ironclad pact forged in the back of a cheap diner over forged documents and shattered lives. We were no longer victims. We were the executioners, and Patricia and Jessica had absolutely no idea that the trap was already snapping shut around their ankles. "Let us burn their fake empire to the ground," Marcus said, his voice echoing with devastating finality. I squeezed his hand. "We start today." The headquarters of Carver Luxury Events occupied the entire top floor of the most prestigious commercial high-rise in downtown Portland. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a reception area that looked more like the lobby of a 5-star hotel than an actual workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the gray city skyline, while imported Italian marble gleamed under carefully curated ambient lighting. Massive arrangements of fresh white orchids sat on mirrored pedestals, filling the air with a cloying, heavy sweetness. It was a monument to absolute excess, and as I stepped off the elevator, my stomach twisted with a sickening realization. I owned this building. David had bought this exact property to secure our daughter's future, and Patricia had illegally mortgaged it to the brink of foreclosure just to fund this sickening illusion of grandeur. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my racing heart to slow its frantic rhythm. Today I was not a forensic accountant holding the evidence of multiple federal felonies. Today I had to play the exact role they had written for me my entire life. I had to be Valerie, the submissive, desperate daughter crawling back to beg for scraps of family approval. I adjusted my plain gray wool coat, making sure I looked appropriately defeated, and walked toward the reception desk. The receptionist barely had time to look up before a sharp, familiar voice cut through the quiet hum of the office. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." I turned to see my sister Jessica emerging from the glass-walled conference room. She was wearing a tailored white crepe dress that undoubtedly cost more than my mortgage, and her wrist was heavy with glittering gold bracelets. The irony burned in my throat. She was wearing Maya's college fund. Jessica crossed the marble floor, her designer heels clicking sharply against the stone. She stopped a few feet away from me, crossing her arms and looking me up and down with an expression of sheer, aristocratic disgust. "What are you doing here, Valerie?" she demanded, her voice loud enough for the nearby staff to hear. Did you finally realize you made a massive mistake walking out on Mom last night? I forced my shoulders to slump. I lowered my gaze, staring at the pristine marble floor instead of her mocking eyes. I came to apologize, I said, letting my voice waver perfectly, imitating the pathetic tone I used to use when I desperately wanted their love. I was upset about the rug, and I overreacted. It is Christmas Eve tomorrow, Jessica. I do not want to tear the family apart. I just want to make peace with Mom. I need to see her. Jessica let out a loud, cruel laugh that echoed through the reception area. She tilted her head back, genuinely amused by my perceived humiliation. Make peace, she mocked, taking a step closer. You threw a hysterical tantrum in front of Marcus, and now you think you can just waltz into our corporate office and beg for forgiveness. Mom is in a closed-door meeting with the floral vendors for the mayoral gala. She does not have time to deal with your manufactured drama today, Valerie. You're always so desperate for attention, but you have absolutely zero ambition to actually do anything with your life. Look at you. You are pushing 35 and you are still wearing off-the-rack department store clothes while playing house with a dead man's mistake? It is pathetic. Every single word she spoke was designed to inflict maximum psychological pain. The old Valerie would have cried. The old Valerie would have believed her. But the woman standing in that lobby felt nothing but a cold surgical focus. I needed to keep her ego inflated. I needed her to feel so completely superior that she would drop her guard. You are right, Jessica, I whispered, letting a single tear slip down my cheek for dramatic effect. I am sorry. I just feel so lost without you guys. You have built this amazing, incredible company, and I am just struggling to keep my head above water. You have everything figured out. I just wanted 5 minutes to leave a card on Mom's desk so she knows I am sorry. Jessica smiled a deeply satisfied, triumphant smirk. She loved hearing me admit defeat. She fed on my perceived misery like a starving animal. She opened her mouth to deliver another crushing insult, but before she could speak, her smartphone rang loudly. She glanced at the screen and let out an irritated sigh. It is the catering director for the winter ball, she muttered, rolling her eyes. They always mess up the caviar orders. She looked back at me, her expression hardening into absolute authority. Wait right here in the lobby, Valerie. Do not move a single muscle. I will go tell Mom you are here groveling, but she probably will not even see you. You can wait with the receptionist until I get back. Jessica turned on her heel and marched down the opposite corridor, completely absorbed in berating the caterer over the phone. The moment she disappeared around the corner, the pathetic, submissive mask I was wearing instantly evaporated. I did not sit in the waiting area. I moved with absolute precision and silence, slipping past the receptionist, who was entirely focused on her glowing computer screen. I walked quickly and purposefully down the main executive hallway, my heart hammering a violent rhythm against my ribs. The thick plush carpeting completely muffled my footsteps. I knew exactly where Patricia's private office was located. I had helped her organize the blueprints 5 years ago when I foolishly allowed her to occupy my building. I reached the heavy frosted glass door at the end of the hall. The polished silver plaque read, Patricia Carver, Chief Executive Officer. I glanced over my shoulder, ensuring the corridor was completely empty, before gripping the stainless steel handle. It turned smoothly, and I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me until it clicked softly into the frame. The office was a masterpiece of intimidation. A massive dark oak desk dominated the room, facing a wall of windows that overlooked the bustling city below. Framed photographs of Patricia shaking hands with local politicians and wealthy socialites lined the walls. It was a shrine to a woman who did not exist. I moved rapidly behind the grand oak desk, completely ignoring the expensive decor. I dropped to my knees on the floor, ignoring the sharp sting as my knees hit the hardwood. Beneath the desk was Patricia's master computer terminal. This was the central nervous system of Carver Luxury Events. This machine connected directly to the private banking portals, the offshore holding accounts, and the hidden shell companies they were using to launder my daughter's college fund. I reached into the deep pocket of my gray wool coat and pulled out a small, sleek black device. It looked exactly like a standard thumb drive, but it was a highly specialized piece of forensic hardware. It was a military-grade keylogger and data cloning terminal that I used to extract encrypted ledgers from corrupt corporate executives. My hands were shaking as I reached around the back of the heavy computer tower, feeling for the hidden primary data port. I found the open slot and firmly pushed the drive into the machine. A tiny green light on the side of the device began to pulse rapidly. I stood up and quickly moved to the leather executive chair, waking the computer monitor. A specialized black terminal window had automatically overridden Patricia's luxury screensaver. The forensic software was actively bypassing her basic administrative passwords and initiating a complete clone of every single financial document, email thread, and banking ledger stored on the local network. A green progress bar appeared on the screen, slowly crawling from left to right. 10%. 20%. The silence in the office was deafening, broken only by the soft whir of the computer fan and the rushing sound of my own blood in my ears. I stared at the door, praying that Jessica's phone call with the caterer would run long. 35%. I knew exactly what I was doing. If they caught me in this office with a data cloning device, they could have me arrested for corporate espionage. They could spin the entire narrative, claiming the unstable jealous sister was trying to steal their proprietary business secrets. I would lose everything, including Maya. 50%. The progress bar seemed to freeze for an agonizing eternity. Come on. I whispered through clenched teeth, my eyes darting between the monitor and the frosted glass door. Suddenly, I heard the sharp, unmistakable clicking of designer heels in the hallway. The footsteps were moving fast, and they were heading directly toward the executive suite. My breath hitched in my throat. I watched the shadow of a figure appear through the frosted glass, growing larger as it approached the door. 75%. The footsteps stopped right outside. I could hear Jessica's muffled voice complaining to someone in the hall. 85%. She placed her hand on the silver door handle. A surge of pure adrenaline shot through my veins. 95%. The handle began to turn downward. I slammed my hand onto the desk, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. 100%. The screen flashed bright green, indicating a successful extraction, just as the door began to swing open. I lunged under the desk, ripping the specialized drive from the port and shoving it deep into my coat pocket. I scrambled backward, dropping perfectly to my hands and knees just as Jessica pushed the heavy door wide open. "What are you doing in here?" Jessica demanded, her voice sharp like a cracking whip. She stood in the doorway, staring down at me with absolute suspicion. I stayed on the floor, making myself look as small and pathetic as humanly possible. I frantically patted the hardwood surface, pretending to search for something. "I am so sorry, Jessica." I stammered, keeping my voice trembling and weak. I dropped my earring. The pearl one David gave me. It rolled under the desk when I was looking at Mom's photos. I was just trying to find it before she got back. Jessica let out a loud, dramatic sigh of pure exasperation, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "You are unbelievable, Valerie. You cannot even walk into an office without causing a clumsy disaster. Get up off the floor. Mom is not coming back. She told me to tell you to get out of her building and never come back until you are ready to show some actual respect." I slowly stood up, brushing the dust off my knees, keeping my head bowed in perfectly simulated shame. "I understand," I whispered, my voice breaking exactly the way she wanted it to. "Tell her I am sorry. I will leave." I walked past Jessica, feeling her intense gaze burning into the side of my face. I kept my shoulders slumped, playing the defeated, broken widow all the way down the long hallway and through the marble reception area. I stepped into the elevator, and the heavy metal door slid shut, cutting off Jessica's triumphant smirk. The moment the elevator began its rapid descent to the ground floor, my entire posture transformed. I stood up perfectly straight, throwing my shoulders back and taking a massive, deep breath of cool air. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers wrapping tightly around the cold, solid metal of the forensic drive. I had it. I had every single piece of data, every forged document, and every hidden offshore transfer they thought they had buried. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had completely won. They had no idea I was walking out of their building holding the exact weapon that would send them both to federal prison. The drive back to my house was a blur of gray skies and freezing rain hitting the windshield. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, my mind processing the sheer volume of data I had just extracted from the belly of the beast. My hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. The terrified, weeping daughter, Jessica, thought she had humiliated in the lobby, was entirely gone. In her place was a woman holding a digital bomb. I pulled into my driveway and quickly moved inside, locking the heavy deadbolt behind me. The house was quiet. My babysitter assured me Maya was happily watching a movie in the living room, completely unaware of the war I was waging for her future. I thanked the sitter, paid her for the extra time, and walked straight into my secure home office. I shut the solid oak door, isolating myself from the rest of the world. It was time to see exactly what Patricia had been hiding in the dark. I sat down at my heavy desk and powered up my dedicated forensic server. This machine was completely severed from standard internet networks, operating on a heavily encrypted closed-loop system to ensure absolute security. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the specialized cloning drive. The black metal felt heavy in my palm. It contained the entire digital life of Carver luxury events. I plugged the drive into the secure port and launched my decryption software. A black terminal window appeared on my left monitor, instantly analyzing the raw data structure. Patricia and Jessica were arrogant, but they were not entirely stupid. They had layered their internal communications behind a rudimentary commercial encryption protocol. It was the kind of basic security package you buy off the shelf to keep low-level employees out of the executive payroll files. For a seasoned forensic accountant, it was like picking a lock with a sledgehammer. I initiated a brute force decryption sequence, my fingers dancing across the mechanical keyboard. Lines of green code cascaded down the black screen as the software systematically dismantled Patricia's security barriers. I sat back and watched the progress bar inch forward. The silence of the office was broken only by the rapid, rhythmic clicking of the processor. Every second felt like an agonizing hour. I knew the drive contained the absolute proof of their bank fraud and their theft of Maya's college fund, but I also knew that was just the surface. Desperate people who steal from children do not just stop at covering their debts. They build escape hatches. I needed to find the hatch. The screen flashed bright green, and a subtle chime echoed through the room. The encryption was broken. The raw cloned data unpacked itself across my dual monitors, transforming into thousands of neatly organized digital folders. I stared at the massive labyrinth of information. Years of emails, internal memos, banking ledgers, and hidden accounting spreadsheets were now completely at my mercy. I did not waste time scrolling blindly. I ran a targeted forensic search algorithm, filtering the entire database for specific high-risk keywords. I searched for offshore routing numbers, international wire codes, expedited property transfers, and non-extradition jurisdictions. The software churned through the massive archive, sifting through the useless noise of floral arrangements and catering contracts to find the toxic core. A single hidden folder flagged by the algorithm appeared on my right monitor. It was buried deep inside an innocuous directory labeled Archived Marketing Assets 2022. I clicked the folder open. It was completely full of heavily encrypted direct communications between Patricia and a private consulting firm located in the Cayman Islands. But these were not event planners. I cross-referenced the firm's name against a global financial watch list. They were black market real estate brokers. They specialized in liquidating massive luxury assets for desperate clients who needed to move staggering amounts of unrecorded cash across international borders without alerting federal authorities. I opened the first email chain, my heart turning to solid ice as I read Patricia's words. The communications dated back 3 months exactly when the commercial bank first began demanding repayment on the fraudulent $2.5 million loan. Patricia had not reached out to these brokers to save her business. She had reached out to them to completely abandon it. I clicked on an attached PDF document. It was a preliminary sales agreement. Patricia was actively leveraging the forged trust documents to sell the massive commercial property directly to a foreign shell company. The brokers had arranged a rapid all-cash closing deliberately designed to completely bypass standard domestic title searches and federal oversight. My eyes scanned down to the closing details and the breath caught in my throat. They had negotiated a deeply discounted sale price of $6 million in pure, untraceable liquid cash. The funds were scheduled to be wired directly into an anonymous offshore account the exact second the paperwork cleared. And the closing date, explicitly highlighted in bold red text, was December 31st. New Year's Eve? The sheer wicked brilliance of their plan hit me with devastating force. New Year's Eve was the perfect blind spot. The domestic banks would be operating on holiday hours, completely distracted by year-end closures and skeletal staffing. The federal regulatory agencies would be essentially asleep. By the time any legitimate domestic institution realized that Sinon's massive piece of commercial real estate had been fraudulently transferred to a foreign entity, Patricia and Jessica would be long gone. I opened another document outlining their travel logistics. They had already secured private charter flights departing from a regional airfield at midnight on December 31st, heading straight to a sovereign territory that did not hold an extradition treaty with the United States. They were going to steal $6 million cash in the forged sale of my daughter's property and completely vanish into the wind, leaving the massive mountain of fraudulent debt behind them. But the most disturbing part of the entire dossier was the exit strategy they had engineered for the collapsing company. A massive financial fraud leaves an enormous crater, and federal investigators always demand a scapegoat. Patricia and Jessica had no intention of leaving a blank trail. They had actively manufactured the perfect victim. I opened a subfolder labeled Corporate Restructuring, and my blood ran absolutely cold. It contained a series of newly drafted liability contracts and corporate debt assumptions. Every single document transferred the total weight of Patricia's failing company, including the fraudulent $2.5 million commercial loan, directly onto the shoulders of Marcus. I read through the documents, my stomach churning with pure revulsion. Jessica had used her administrative access to Marcus's architectural firm to completely entangle his legitimate business with her mother's rotting empire. She had drafted legal provisions that made Marcus the sole guarantor of Carver luxury events. The second Patricia and Jessica boarded that private jet with their stolen millions, the entire criminal enterprise would legally default onto Marcus. When the federal investigators finally arrived to audit the ruins, they would find a perfectly forged paper trail pointing directly at a hardworking African-American architect. The authorities would look at the massive offshore transfers, the drained accounts, and the illegal mortgage, and they would arrest Marcus. They would seize his firm, they would freeze his personal assets, and they would send an entirely innocent man to federal prison for the rest of his life. Jessica was completely willing to destroy her own husband and leave her 2 children fatherless just to guarantee her luxurious escape. I pushed my chair back from the desk, my entire body trembling with a mixture of profound horror and absolute rage. The cruelty was so deep, so entirely devoid of basic human empathy, that it was almost difficult to comprehend. They had discarded Maya because she was adopted. They had stolen my trust money because they viewed me as weak. And they had ruthlessly set up Marcus to be slaughtered by the federal government because he was convenient and legally bound to Jessica. They truly believed they were untouchable masterminds, playing a grand game of chess with the lives of the people who had done nothing but support them. I stood up and paced the length of my office, the hardwood floor creaking slightly beneath my feet. I looked at the calendar hanging on the wall. Today was December 27th. The illegal offshore liquidation and their grand escape were scheduled for the 31st. I had exactly 4 days. 4 days to dismantle a conspiracy that had been meticulously planned for months. 4 days to stop the sale, protect my daughter's future, and save Marcus from a lifetime in federal prison. I walked back to the glowing monitors and placed my hands flat on the desk. The sheer panic that had briefly threatened to consume me was completely swallowed by a cold, terrifying calm. Patricia thought she was operating in the shadows, but she had just handed her entire playbook directly to a seasoned forensic accountant. She had laid out her exact timeline, her exact offshore routing numbers, and her exact criminal mechanisms. She thought she was building an escape hatch, but she had actually drafted her own death warrant. I sat back down and pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. I grabbed my red pen and began mapping out the counter-offensive. I could not just call the police. A standard police investigation would take weeks of bureaucratic red tape and jurisdictional delays. By the time a local detective secured a warrant, Patricia and Jessica would be sitting on a tropical beach with $6 million. I needed a completely flawless legal guillotine. I needed an execution strategy so swift and so absolutely devastating that they would not even realize their heads had been severed until they tried to walk away. I started compiling the offshore routing data, the forged signatures, and the fake liability transfers into a highly secure, heavily encrypted master file. I needed to synchronize a simultaneous multi-agency strike. I needed my trust attorney to execute an immediate emergency injunction on the commercial property title, freezing the land transfer at the exact moment the offshore brokers attempted to close. I needed Marcus to silently sever his architectural firm from Jessica's toxic access, locking her out of the accounts without triggering any alarm bells. And most importantly, I needed to leverage my professional contacts within the Federal Financial Crimes Division to lay a silent trap on the specific international wire routing numbers Patricia planned to use. I spent the next 3 hours completely lost in the forensic flow, drafting the architecture of their total ruin. I cross-referenced banking statutes, highlighted federal wire fraud regulations, and built an impenetrable wall of digital evidence. Every single keystroke was a nail in their coffin. They had spent my entire life telling me I was useless, telling me I was ungrateful, and telling me I did not belong. They had mocked my clothes, my career, and my beloved daughter. But they were about to learn a very painful lesson about the quiet daughter they had spent decades pushing into the background. I stared at the glowing offshore account numbers, tracing the digital pathways that led directly to their illicit sanctuary. The Cayman Islands registry was notoriously difficult to penetrate, but the brokers Patricia had hired were sloppy. They had used a series of nested shell corporations to obscure the true beneficiary, but they had left a microscopic trail of metadata linking the primary holding company directly back to Jessica's personal email server. It was a fatal error born of pure arrogance. I captured the metadata packets, preserving the timestamps and the unique IP identifiers. This was the absolute gold standard of forensic evidence. It provided an unbroken, undeniable chain of custody, proving that Jessica was not just a passive participant, but a primary architect of the offshore conspiracy. My mind shifted to Marcus and the sheer cruelty of the corporate debt transfer. I reopened the liability documents, analyzing the legal structure Jessica had manipulated. She had exploited a standard spousal indemnification clause, a routine piece of paperwork designed to protect family assets, and weaponized it to turn Marcus into a financial human shield. The forged signatures on the loan agreements were designed to mirror Marcus's handwriting, just enough to pass a preliminary digital scan by a rushed bank clerk. It was malicious, cold-blooded, and entirely terrifying. I began extracting the raw signature files, running them through a digital overlay program that highlighted the inconsistent pressure points and the unnatural hesitation marks that always characterize a forgery. I saved the biometric analysis, building a secondary dossier specifically designed to completely exonerate Marcus the second the federal authorities began their inevitable audit. The sheer scale of the operation I was mounting required absolute precision. One wrong move, one leaked hint of suspicion, and Patricia would instantly accelerate the timeline, liquidating the property for whatever pennies on the dollar she could get and fleeing early. I had to maintain the absolute illusion of the pathetic broken daughter. I had to let them continue to gloat, continue to pack their luxury luggage, and continue to believe they had orchestrated the perfect crime. The silence in my office was profound, filled only with the quiet hum of my cooling fans and the relentless ticking of the clock. Exactly 4 days, 96 hours until the hammer fell. I closed the laptop, my heart steady, my mind clear, and my resolve absolute. The days of the submissive daughter were completely over. The era of the executioner had officially begun. The morning air was bitterly cold when Marcus and I finalized the absolute destruction of my mother and sister. We sat at my kitchen island, the only light coming from the small pendant lamp overhead, casting long shadows across the stack of heavy legal documents resting between us. I had spent the last 48 hours drafting these papers, with the kind of ruthless precision that only a betrayed forensic accountant could muster. To the untrained eye, to someone blinded by arrogance and greed like Patricia and Jessica, these documents looked exactly like a standard commercial bridge loan agreement. The first page prominently displayed the logo of a legitimate private lending firm Marcus occasionally used for his architectural projects. The bold text clearly stated that Marcus was securing a $500,000 emergency capital injection to stabilize Carver luxury events. But the true masterpiece of this trap was completely buried in the execution clauses at the very back of the thick stack. I slid the heavy manila folder across the smooth granite counter toward Marcus. He looked down at the pristine white pages, his jaw tight and his dark eyes burning with a quiet, lethal resolve. We had gone over the plan a dozen times, but the sheer weight of what we were about to do hung heavy in the silent kitchen. I walked him through the specific legal mechanisms one last time, ensuring he knew exactly how to play his part. The documents he was holding were not a bridge loan. They were an irrevocable declaration of primary financial liability and a direct confession of federal wire fraud wrapped in complex corporate jargon. By signing those pages, Patricia and Jessica would legally acknowledge under the strict penalty of federal perjury that they were the absolute sole beneficiaries of the fraudulent offshore escrow accounts. The paperwork included explicit clauses that permanently bypassed their corporate liability shields, attaching the $2.5 million forged mortgage directly to their personal Social Security numbers. They were about to sign a legally binding confession that would hand the federal government everything they needed to lock them away for decades. Marcus picked up the folder, his large hands perfectly steady. He looked at me across the island and gave a single determined nod. "I am going to sell this so perfectly, Valerie," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "They are going to think they just manipulated the biggest fool on the planet." I handed him a small black digital audio transmitter, completely disguised as a standard tie clip. He fastened it securely to his collar, checking the connection one last time. I wanted to hear every single word. I needed to witness the exact moment they sealed their own fate. An hour later, I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, parked 2 blocks away from Patricia's sprawling corporate headquarters. The heater was running full blast, but my hands were still ice cold as I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the sleek black audio receiver resting on the passenger seat. The device crackled to life with a soft static hiss as Marcus stepped out of the elevator on the top floor. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the headrest, painting the scene in my mind as the audio feed transmitted the sounds of the lavish marble lobby. I heard Marcus greet the receptionist, his voice projecting the perfect blend of forced calm and underlying panic. He asked to see Jessica and Patricia, immediately claiming it was a financial emergency regarding the business. The heavy frosted glass doors of Patricia's private office clicked open, and the sharp, haughty voice of my sister flooded through the tiny speaker. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Jessica demanded, sounding incredibly inconvenienced. "Mom and I are in the middle of finalizing the vendor list for the New Year's Eve gala. You cannot just barge in here during business hours." I heard Marcus let out a long, shaky sigh, an absolute masterclass in acting. "I know, Jessica," he said, his voice trembling perfectly. "I know you are busy, but this could not wait. I have been up all night trying to figure out how to solve the liquidity crisis you told me about. I know the business is struggling to bridge the gap before the big holiday payments clear. I know you are stressed, and I cannot stand seeing you and Patricia so worried about losing everything you have built." There was a brief pause on the audio feed. I could practically see Patricia and Jessica exchanging a panicked, calculating glance. They had completely manufactured that liquidity crisis to pressure him into signing over his firm, and now he was standing right in their office offering a solution. Patricia spoke next, her tone shifting into that sickly sweet maternal register she always used when she was about to bleed someone dry. "Oh, Marcus, darling," she cooed, sounding tragically burdened. "We did not want to worry you with the corporate details. It has just been so difficult lately. We have been working around the clock to keep this family afloat. What exactly are you proposing?" I heard the heavy manila folder hit the polished surface of Patricia's massive oak desk. I liquidated some of my personal stock portfolios and took out an emergency bridge loan against my architectural firm. Marcus explained, sounding like a desperate, devoted husband trying to save the day. "It is $500,000 in immediate liquid cash. The funds will be wired directly into your primary operating account by noon tomorrow. It should be more than enough to cover the vendor debts and keep the business completely secure until the new year. All I need are your signatures as the managing directors to authorize the capital injection." The silence that followed was absolute music to my ears. I sat in my car holding my breath, completely captivated by the sheer brilliance of Marcus's performance. He had just handed them a lifeline built entirely out of rope. He was offering them $500,000 of clean, legitimate cash to help fund their illegal escape to the Cayman Islands. It was the ultimate temptation for 2 women whose entire existence was fueled by boundless, bottomless greed. "Oh my God, Marcus," Jessica gasped, her voice suddenly thick with fake, overwhelming gratitude. She sounded like she was on the verge of tears. "I cannot believe you did this for us. You are literally saving this company. You are saving our family." I heard the rustle of clothing as she presumably threw her arms around him, embracing the man she was actively planning to destroy. Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial relief. You are a good man, Marcus. I always told Jessica she married a brilliant provider. Where do we need to sign? Marcus cleared his throat, maintaining the illusion of the hesitant, careful businessman. The lender requires both of your signatures on the primary liability clauses, he explained, flipping to the back of the thick stack of documents. It is standard boilerplate language for a commercial bridge loan. It just legally verifies that Carver Luxury Events is accepting the capital and that you are the primary beneficiaries of the incoming funds. I flagged the signature lines with yellow tabs. I am going to step out to the hallway for just a minute to call the loan officer and let him know we are executing the agreement. Take your time and read it over. I heard Marcus's heavy footsteps retreat across the room, followed by the solid click of the office door closing. He had left them completely alone with the documents, leaving the audio transmitter perfectly positioned on his tie clip just outside the door, catching every single word spoken inside the office. The second the door latched, the fake gratitude instantly vanished. I cannot believe he actually fell for it. Jessica hissed, her voice dropping into a harsh, vicious whisper. He is such a gullible, pathetic idiot. He literally just handed us an extra $500,000 in clean cash for the offshore accounts. We can wire this directly into the Cayman Holdings the second it clears tomorrow morning. Patricia let out a low, dark laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It is almost too easy, she gloated, the sound of pages flipping rapidly as she searched for the yellow signature tabs. He is so desperate to be the hero of this family that he does not even realize he's handing us our entire travel budget. By the time he figures out the business is completely hollowed out, we will be drinking champagne in a non-extradition zone, and he will be sitting in a federal courtroom trying to explain why his firm is tied to our debt. Just sign the damn papers, Jessica, before he comes back in here and starts asking questions. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Hearing their raw, unfiltered cruelty validated every single dark suspicion I had ever harbored about them. They felt absolutely no remorse. They felt no hesitation about destroying a good man, leaving his children with a ruined father, and stealing from a grieving widow. They were completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance. I listened to the distinct sharp scratch of expensive fountain pens moving rapidly across the heavy paper. They were not reading a single word of the complex legal jargon I had meticulously drafted. They were completely blinded by the massive dollar sign printed on the first page. They did not see the tiny, unassumingly labeled clauses on page 14, where they legally swore under federal penalty that they were the sole orchestrators of the $2.5 million commercial mortgage. They did not notice the dense financial declarations on page 22, where they officially claimed absolute ownership of the hidden offshore shell companies holding my daughter's stolen college fund. They were so utterly consumed by their arrogant belief that everyone around them was a stupid, usable pawn that they were happily, eagerly signing their own federal death warrants. There, Jessica said, the pen clattering loudly against the wooden desk. Done. $500,000 courtesy of my absolute fool of a husband. Make sure you pack the good jewelry, Mum. We are never stepping foot in this miserable, rainy city ever again. Patricia hummed in agreement. Put the folders back perfectly, she instructed coldly. We need to keep him completely calm and docile for exactly 4 more days, until the commercial property sale closes on New Year's Eve. Once that cash clears the wire, we drop the corporate bomb on his lap and we disappear. The office door clicked open again as Marcus stepped back inside. I spoke to the bank, he announced, his voice incredibly steady, despite the vile things he had just listened to them say. The transfer is fully approved pending the signed contracts. Do you have everything filled out? Yes, darling, Jessica, cooed her voice, instantly snapping back into the sickeningly sweet tone of a loving wife. We signed exactly where you told us to. Thank you so much for stepping up for this family, Marcus. We truly do not know what we would do without you. I will take these straight to the courier, Marcus said, the sound of the heavy manila folder being scooped up, echoing through the transmitter. I will see you at home tonight, Jessica. I sat in my car listening to Marcus walk down the marble hallway and step into the elevator. The audio feed cut to static as the heavy doors closed. I reached over and pressed the power button on the receiver, bathing the car in absolute silence. I slowly exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. The trap had worked flawlessly. Patricia and Jessica had swallowed the bait whole, completely ignorant to the deadly hook hidden inside. They thought they had secured their luxurious escape. They thought they were brilliant masterminds who had outsmarted a naive architect and a broken, submissive daughter. But as I sat in the cold rain, staring at the towering corporate building, I knew the absolute truth. They had just permanently legally bound themselves to one of the most massive financial fraud cases in state history. The timeline was officially locked in. We had exactly 4 days until New Year's Eve to bring the entire federal hammer down on their heads. I pulled away from the downtown diner with Marcus's signed confession documents securely locked in my briefcase. The rain beat heavily against the windshield of my car, but my mind was completely clear. For 34 years, I had let Patricia and Jessica dictate my worth. I had allowed them to make me feel small, inadequate, and entirely disposable. They had mocked my career as a forensic accountant, treating it like a boring desk job, while they paraded around high society galas spending money they did not earn. But today, my boring desk job was going to be the exact instrument of their absolute destruction. I did not drive back to my modest suburban home. I bypassed the highway and drove straight into the heart of the city, pulling into the heavily guarded underground parking garage of the federal building. As a forensic accountant who specializes in uncovering corporate embezzlement, I have spent the last decade building a network of highly capable contacts within the federal government. I know exactly how the Internal Revenue Service operates, and I know exactly what a federal prosecutor needs to secure a conviction without a shadow of a reasonable doubt. You do not just walk into a federal building with accusations and hurt feelings. You walk in with a mathematically flawless, unassailable trail of evidence. I stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor and walked directly into the secure conference room where Special Agent Thomas Vance and Federal Prosecutor Sarah Jenkins were already waiting. Thomas was a veteran investigator for the Financial Crimes Division, a man who had seen every variation of human greed. Sarah was a ruthless, brilliant attorney who specialized in international wire fraud. They knew me. They respected my work, but when I opened my heavy leather briefcase and began laying out the physical documents across the polished mahogany table, even their seasoned expressions shifted into absolute shock. I did not waste time with emotional introductions. I started with the foundation of the fraud. I slid the forged $2.5 million commercial mortgage agreement across the table. I pointed out the biometric inconsistencies in the signature where Jessica had illegally signed my name to steal the equity from my daughter's trust. I watched Thomas trace the forged lines with his pen, his jaw tightening. Next, I pulled out the banking ledgers, detailing the systematic draining of Maya's protected education fund. I laid out the precise routing numbers, matching the stolen $276,000 directly to Jessica's platinum credit card payments, and the luxury auto dealership where she had just custom-ordered her brand-new Porsche. I explained how they had knowingly robbed an 8-year-old child to fund their fake aristocratic lifestyle. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the transaction dates. The sheer audacity of stealing a child's future to buy a sports car was sickening even to a federal prosecutor who dealt with criminals every single day. But I was not finished. I reached into my bag and produced the printed transcripts from the hidden keylogger I had planted in Patricia's master terminal. I walked them through the encrypted emails between Patricia and the black market real estate brokers in the Cayman Islands. I showed them the illegal liquidation contracts, the heavily discounted $6 million all-cash sale of my commercial property, and the confirmed flight itineraries for a private charter jet scheduled to leave the country at midnight on New Year's Eve. Then, for the final fatal blow, I placed the audio receiver on the center of the table and pressed play. The pristine acoustics of the federal conference room amplified the vicious, cruel voices of my mother and sister. Thomas and Sarah listened in absolute silence as Patricia and Jessica gleefully admitted to tricking Marcus into signing the liability documents. They listened to my own mother laugh about leaving a completely innocent man to face federal prison while she escaped with millions in stolen cash. They listened to Jessica mock her hard-working husband, calling him a gullible, pathetic idiot for trying to save their failing company. When the audio recording finally clicked off, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. She looked at me with a mixture of profound professional respect and deep human sympathy. "Valerie," she said quietly, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. "In my entire career, I have never seen a fraud case handed to me with such absolute devastating perfection. You have given us the motive, the mechanism, the paper trail, and the recorded confession. They have committed grand larceny, bank fraud, identity theft, and international wire fraud. They are looking at decades in federal prison." Thomas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We need to move immediately, Valerie," he stated firmly. "If they have a flight booked for New Year's Eve, we cannot risk them liquidating any localized assets or emptying their domestic accounts before they try to run. I will get a federal judge to sign off on the warrants this afternoon, but if we send agents to the estate today, we risk a panic. If Patricia realizes we are onto her, she might try to wire the existing stolen funds through a decentralized crypto network, making it nearly impossible to recover Maya's college money." I shook my head, meeting his intense gaze. "We do not arrest them today, Thomas," I said, my voice cold and entirely calculated. "We need them to feel completely secure. We need them to believe their master plan is working flawlessly right up until the exact moment the trap snaps shut on their ankles. We let them walk into the new year thinking they have won. But I need you to sever their financial lifelines right now." Sarah smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile, perfectly understanding my strategy. "A shadow freeze," she suggested, nodding in agreement. "It is the perfect mechanism for flight risk targets." I felt a dark, satisfying thrill wash over my entire body. A shadow freeze is one of the most terrifying weapons in the federal arsenal. It is entirely invisible. When the government executes a standard asset freeze, the bank immediately notifies the account holder. The credit cards decline at the register, the debit cards are swallowed by the machines, and the client instantly knows they are under federal investigation. But a shadow freeze is a completely different psychological nightmare. Thomas explained the process to ensure I understood the parameters. He would submit the sealed federal order directly to the highest tier of compliance officers at Patricia and Jessica's wealth management banks. The banks would essentially create a digital ghost town around their accounts. Patricia and Jessica would still be able to log into their mobile banking apps. They would check their screens and see the massive inflated balances shining brightly. They would see the stolen $2.5 million from the forged mortgage. They would see the drained college funds resting in their checking accounts. The numbers would look absolutely real. The balances would appear entirely untouched. But the money was completely gone. It was trapped behind an invisible, impenetrable federal firewall. If Patricia tried to wire those funds to her Cayman Island brokers, the banking interface would simply show a loading screen or a generic pending status indefinitely. If Jessica tried to pay the final installment on her luxury Porsche, the dealership would receive a silent, automated delay notification. They could look at the money, but they could not move a single microscopic cent. They were officially dead in the water, and they had absolutely no idea. "Do it," I commanded, my voice unwavering. "Log them in the ghost vault." I sat in that conference room for another 2 hours, helping Sarah draft the massive, highly complex legal injunctions required to formally intercept the commercial property sale. We meticulously untangled the liability clauses Jessica had fraudulently attached to Marcus's architectural firm, completely shielding his legitimate business from the impending fallout. We built a legal guillotine so sharp and so heavy that when it finally dropped, it would sever Patricia's entire corporate empire in a single devastating blow. By the time I finally walked out of the federal building, the sun had set, casting long, dark shadows across the wet Portland streets. The freezing rain had turned into a light, misty drizzle. I stood on the sidewalk, pulling my gray wool coat tightly around my shoulders, taking a deep, cleansing breath of the cold winter air. The transformation was complete. The desperate daughter, who had spent her entire life begging for scraps of affection from a toxic, narcissistic mother, was completely gone. In her place stood a fiercely protective mother who had just successfully weaponized the entire United States federal government against her abusers. I walked to my car, the streetlights reflecting of the wet pavement. I pictured Patricia and Jessica sitting in their lavish mansion surrounded by expensive catered food and imported holiday decorations. I pictured my mother sipping expensive champagne, congratulating herself on her brilliant criminal mind. I pictured my sister scrolling through designer catalogs on her phone, gleefully planning her new luxurious life in the Caribbean. They were probably looking at their banking apps right at this very moment, smiling at the millions of dollars staring back at them from their glowing screens. They felt so powerful. They felt so incredibly untouchable. They truly believed they had successfully crushed me, discarded Maya, and ruined Marcus without leaving a single trace. They had absolutely no idea that their entire kingdom was already reduced to ashes. They had no idea that the money they were staring at was nothing more than a digital mirage, completely controlled by the federal agents I had just unleashed upon them. The invisible noose was already wrapped tightly around their necks, and the federal government was just waiting for me to give the signal to pull the lever. I unlocked my car, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. The countdown to New Year's Eve had officially begun, and I was going to enjoy every single second of their silent, invisible destruction. The heavy mahogany doors of Silas Thorne's law firm closed behind me, completely shutting out the chaotic noise of this downtown traffic. I walked into his private suite with my shoulders pulled back and my spine perfectly straight. Silas was not a standard family attorney. He was a ruthless, highly specialized corporate litigator who dealt exclusively in aggressive asset reclamation and hostile financial takeovers. He was a man who unmade empires for a living. I had retained his services the moment I left the federal prosecutor's office, knowing that while the government would handle the criminal charges of wire fraud and forgery, I needed a shark to handle the immediate physical destruction of Patricia's absolute most prized possession. I sat down in the leather chair across from his massive glass desk and handed him the heavily encrypted flash drive, along with the thick stack of physical property deeds I had pulled from the county database. Silas did not offer any warm pleasantries. He plugged the drive into his secure terminal and began reviewing the documents, his sharp grey eyes scanning the digital ledgers and the forged signature blocks with the cold, calculating speed of a predator mapping out its hunting ground. For 34 years, I had believed that Patricia's sprawling colonial estate was a monument to her incredible business acumen. She had constantly paraded that mansion in my face, using it as physical proof of her superiority. She had mocked my modest suburban home, criticized my simple car, and endlessly bragged about the imported Italian marble and the custom velvet furniture that filled her massive living room. But as Silas cross-referenced the financial origins of the estate against the fraudulent commercial loan, I had uncovered the absolute sickening truth finally materialized on the screen in front of us. Patricia did not own that mansion. She had never truly owned it. When she and Jessica walked into that bank and illegally forged my name to secure a $2.5 million commercial mortgage against David's trust, they did not just take the cash. They explicitly structured the forged commercial loan to serve as the absolute primary guarantor for a massive residential mortgage on Patricia's personal estate. The sheer audacity of the crime took my breath away. Patricia had literally leveraged the sacred, legally protected trust fund of an 8-year-old orphan to buy herself a luxury mansion. Every single lavish holiday party she hosted, every expensive bottle of champagne she poured, and every single time she looked down her nose at my daughter, she was doing it inside a house subsidized by stolen money. The $10,000 Persian rug that Maya had accidentally dripped water on, the rug that prompted Patricia to violently grab my child and call her trash, was purchased with equity, physically stolen from Maya's own future. My blood ran completely cold in my veins. The emotional abuse was one thing, but the calculated financial predation was an entirely different level of evil. They had actively manipulated the legal system to construct a wealthy fantasyland, using my late husband's legacy as their private bank account. Silas leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together as he looked across the desk at me. "This is entirely reckless, Valerie," he said, his voice a low clinical murmur. By cross-collateralizing her residential property with the fraudulent commercial loan, she has completely bypassed her corporate liability shields. She tied her personal residence directly to a forged instrument. With the federal shadow freeze currently locking down all of her liquid assets, she's going to miss the massive balloon payment required by the bank at the end of this month. And because the original guarantee was a verified federal forgery, you, as the rightful and true trustee, have the absolute legal authority to initiate an emergency asset reclamation protocol. I looked at him, keeping my expression perfectly composed. "Explain exactly what that means, Silas," I commanded. "It means we do not have to wait for a standard 30-day eviction process," he replied, a sharp, dangerous smile touching the corners of his mouth. In cases of documented high-level financial fraud, where a residential property was acquired using illegally leveraged trust assets, the true trustee can petition the court for an immediate emergency seizure to prevent the criminal party from liquidating or damaging the property. Because we already have the federal prosecutor validating the forgery, the judge will sign this order immediately. We can have armed county sheriffs standing on her front porch within 72 hours with the absolute legal authority to physically remove her and every single piece of her property from the premises. I want to pause right here for a second. If you are listening to this and you have ever had a toxic, arrogant family member continuously parade their wealth in your face while secretly using you or exploiting you to fund their extravagant lifestyle, I want you to know that you are not alone. Please drop a comment right now and tell me if you have ever discovered a massive lie hiding behind someone's perfect fake image. I read every single comment, and knowing your stories gives me the strength to share mine. And if you are deeply invested in seeing exactly how this all falls apart, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss a single moment of what comes next. Now let me tell you exactly how I secured the final nail in their coffin. Draft the emergency reclamation order, I told Silas, my voice dropping into a register of absolute unwavering authority. I want the execution date synchronized perfectly with the federal raid on her corporate headquarters. Patricia and Jessica have booked private charter flights to flee the country on New Year's Eve. They intend to illegally sell my commercial property, take the $6 million in cash, and vanish, leaving Marcus to take the entire fall for their massive corporate debt. I want the sheriffs walking through the front doors of that mansion at the exact same moment the federal agents lock down their private jet on the tarmac. I want them to lose the business, the escape route, and the house all in one single synchronized, devastating breath. Silas turned back to his computer, his fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard as he drafted the emergency legal filings. The printer hummed to life, churning out page after page of heavy legal consequence. He stamped each document with a heavy notary seal, the sharp thud echoing loudly in the quiet office. He compiled the paperwork into a thick, imposing red folder. "This is the legal equivalent of a tactical strike, Valerie," he said, sliding the folder across the desk. "The moment the judge signs this tomorrow morning, Patricia Carver will legally become a trespasser in her own home. The sheriffs will give her exactly 10 minutes to gather whatever fits in a single suitcase before they permanently change the locks." I took the red folder, feeling the physical weight of my mother's impending destruction in my hands. I thanked Silas and walked out of the law firm, stepping back onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The grey winter sky was beginning to darken, casting a cold shadow over the city, but I felt a profound radiating heat spreading through my entire chest. Every single piece of the board was perfectly, completely aligned. The federal shadow freeze was actively trapping their money. Marcus was silently stripping his architectural firm out of Jessica's toxic grasp, and I was holding the authorized legal documentation to physically throw my mother out onto the street. The invisible guillotine had been hoisted high into the air, and the blade was razor sharp. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, placing the heavy red folder carefully on the passenger side. I sat in the quiet isolation of the vehicle, taking a moment to simply breathe. For my entire life, I had been terrified of Patricia's anger. I had constantly twisted myself into knots, trying to avoid her judgment and trying to protect my daughter from her blatant, cruel favoritism. I had allowed her to convince me that I was weak, that I was unintelligent, and that I desperately needed her guidance to survive. But sitting there holding the keys to her absolute ruin, I realized she had never been strong. She was nothing but a fragile, insecure predator hiding behind a mountain of stolen money and cheap psychological manipulation. Suddenly, the harsh vibration of my phone shattered the quiet atmosphere of the car. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark interior. A new text message had just arrived. I glanced down at the caller identification. It was Patricia. My stomach tightened instinctively, a decades-old reflex that I quickly forced down. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of her words practically bled through the digital text. "Valerie." My mother wrote, her tone dripping with that familiar, sickening condescension. "I know things were incredibly tense at the house for Christmas, and you overreacted terribly. But family is family, and I am willing to be the bigger person. I am hosting my annual New Year's Eve gala at the estate on Thursday night. The mayor and several major investors will be in attendance to see Jessica's new corporate presentation. You really should come. Maybe seeing how truly successful people operate will finally inspire you to do something meaningful with your life instead of just holding on to David's memory. Dress appropriately for once. Do not bring the child. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the message 3 times to fully absorb the staggering depths of her delusion. She was inviting me to a massive luxury gala at a mansion she had stolen from me. She was actively planning to flee the country with millions of dollars in stolen cash later that exact same night, and she wanted to use her final hours in the city to publicly humiliate me one last time in front of her wealthy peers. She wanted me to stand in the corner in my cheap clothes and watch her shine, completely unaware that she had already lost everything. She honestly believed I was still the broken, submissive daughter who would show up just to seek her validation. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had completely mastered the game. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted an audience. She wanted a grand dramatic finale to her glorious career as a high society elite. I placed my fingers on the digital keyboard, my mind perfectly clear and my resolve absolute. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. I was going to give her a New Year's Eve party that the entire city would never ever forget. I typed out a single brief sentence entirely devoid of emotion or hesitation. I hit send, watching the small blue bubble appear on the screen, sealing her absolute inevitable fate. I would not miss it for the world. The Portland Country Club was completely transformed into a winter wonderland of absolute sickening excess. A massive archway of imported white roses and silver-frosted branches framed the main entrance. Valets in crisp black uniforms rushed to open the doors of luxury sedans and sports cars. I pulled my 10-year-old sedan into the circular driveway, feeling the immediate judgmental stares from the club staff. I handed my keys to a young valet and stepped out into the freezing night air. I was wearing a simple tailored navy dress I had bought years ago. It was understated, elegant, and completely out of place in Patricia's world of flashy, aggressive wealth. I walked up the marble steps, my heels clicking a steady, calm rhythm. Tonight was the night. The clock was ticking toward midnight, and every single piece of my meticulously constructed trap was locked into place. I stepped through the heavy oak doors and handed my wool coat to the coat check attendant. The grand ballroom was a sensory overload of pure stolen money. 3 massive crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant fractured light across the room. A 12-piece string quartet played soft classical music in the corner, completely drowned out by the loud, arrogant laughter of the city elite. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets circulated through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and glasses of vintage French champagne. Patricia had spared absolutely no expense for her grand farewell party. She had invited the mayor, 2 city council members, and dozens of wealthy real estate developers to witness her supposed triumph. I stood near the back of the room by a towering ice sculpture, shaped like a swan sipping a glass of sparkling water and watching the parasites feast on my daughter's future. Through the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, I spotted my sister Jessica. She was holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of fawning socialites. She wore a custom crimson silk gown that hugged her figure perfectly, but it was the jewelry that made my blood run completely cold. A heavy, dazzling necklace of flawless cut diamonds rested against her collarbone, matching the massive teardrop diamond earrings that swung as she threw her head back to laugh at someone's joke. I stared at those stones, knowing exactly where they came from. Those diamonds were the physical manifestation of Maya's stolen college fund. Jessica was literally wearing the money she had illegally drained from an 8-year-old child. She looked so incredibly smug, so entirely pleased with her own reflection. She caught my eye across the room, and her smile twisted into a vicious, mocking smirk. She raised her champagne glass in my direction, a silent, condescending toast to my perceived failure. I did not look away. I simply raised my glass of water in return, holding her gaze with a terrifying calm that made her smirk falter for just a fraction of a second. A few feet away from Jessica stood Marcus. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, holding a glass of bourbon he was not drinking. He looked handsome, but there was a deep weariness in his eyes, a heavy exhaustion from carrying the weight of this deception for the past 4 days. We made brief eye contact. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod, He had secured the fake bridge loan documents. He had completely isolated his architectural firm from the toxic fallout. He was perfectly positioned, playing the role of the devoted, supportive husband while standing right next to the woman who had actively plotted to send him to federal prison. The sheer strength it took for him to stand in that room and smile at those monsters was awe-inspiring. We were two soldiers waiting for the final command to strike. At exactly 11 o'clock, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of conversation faded as the lights in the ballroom dimmed, leaving only a bright white spotlight focused on the raised stage at the front of the room. Patricia stepped into the light. She looked radiant, wrapped in a silver sequined gown that caught every flash of the event photographer's cameras. She held a crystal flute of champagne in one hand and a silver microphone in the other. She radiated the absolute confidence of a woman who believed she had completely conquered the world. I moved slightly closer, stepping out from the shadow of the ice sculpture to ensure I had a perfect view of her face. I wanted to remember this exact moment of her peak arrogance. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," Patricia began, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom, smooth and expertly modulated. She smiled warmly at the crowd, playing the role of the humble matriarch flawlessly. As I look around this beautiful room, I am overwhelmed with gratitude for the incredible community we have built here in Portland. This city has given Carver Luxury Events so much, and it has been my absolute honor to serve as your premier event director for the past decade. She paused, waiting for the polite applause to ripple through the crowd. She soaked it in, closing her eyes for a brief second of pure theatrical enjoyment. But as we look toward the new year, we must always be moving forward, expanding our horizons, and reaching for greater heights. Patricia took a slow sip of her champagne, locking eyes with one of the wealthy developers in the front row. That is why I am absolutely thrilled to announce tonight that our company is embarking on a massive new venture. In just a few short hours, Carver Luxury Events will be finalizing a staggering real estate acquisition. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the whisper of excitement spread through the investors in the room. It is a multi-million-dollar deal that will entirely redefine our corporate portfolio and cement our legacy in this city for generations to come. This is the culmination of years of hard work, strategic planning, and absolute relentless dedication. The sheer audacity of her words made my stomach churn. She was standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people actively bragging about the illegal, fraudulent sale of my property. She was calling her grand theft a strategic acquisition. She honestly believed that in less than an hour, the offshore wire transfer would clear, dropping $6 million of untraceable cash directly into her Cayman Island accounts. She thought she was giving a victory speech. She had absolutely no idea she was reciting her own confession into a microphone, while federal agents were actively monitoring her digital footprint. She raised her glass high into the air, the spotlight catching the crystal. To the new year, Patricia declared, her voice ringing with absolute triumph. To new beginnings, incredible wealth, and the undeniable power of family. The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic cheers, raising their glasses and drinking to a lie. Jessica clapped loudly from the center of the room, her stolen diamonds sparkling under the chandeliers. Patricia beamed from the stage, bathing in the adoration of a city she was actively planning to abandon in exactly 60 minutes. I stood in the back of the room, the cool glass of sparkling water resting against my palm. I looked at the large digital clock projected above the stage. It read 11:15. The offshore transaction was scheduled to execute at exactly midnight. The federal shadow freeze was armed and waiting. The county sheriffs were assembling their eviction team. The entire room was cheering for a queen whose castle was already burning to the ground. I took a slow sip of my water, my eyes locked on Patricia's smiling face. "Enjoy the applause, mother," I thought to myself, the cold silence of my mind cutting through the noise of the ballroom, because it is the last time you will ever hear it. The polite applause from my mother's sickening speech was still echoing behind me as I slipped out of the grand ballroom, leaving the clinking champagne glasses and the suffocating arrogance of the Portland elite completely behind. I walked quietly down the marble corridor toward the opulent guest powder room, my simple navy overlay dress feeling incredibly heavy against my skin. For my entire life, I had worn metaphorical and physical armor designed specifically to make myself invisible. I had blended into the background because standing in the light always invited my mother's cruel and relentless criticism. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the powder room and locked it firmly behind me. The space was completely empty, bathed in warm, flattering light and smelling of expensive imported jasmine soap. I stood in front of the massive gold leaf mirror and looked at my own reflection. The woman staring back at me was a mother who had almost lost her daughter's future. She was a widow whose late husband's legacy had been violently violated. She was a sister who had been mocked and discarded. But tonight that woman was officially dead. I reached for the hidden side zipper of the drab navy dress and pulled it downward in one swift fluid motion. The cheap restrictive fabric pooled around my ankles on the pristine tile floor. Underneath, I was wearing the true armor I had brought for this exact battle. It was a breathtaking floor-length gown made of liquid emerald silk. The rich, vibrant color perfectly complemented my skin, and the masterful tailoring draped flawlessly across my figure, commanding absolute attention with every single subtle movement. I ran my hands down the smooth, expensive fabric, feeling a profound radiating heat spreading through my chest. I unpinned my dark hair, letting the heavy dark waves cascade freely down my back and shoulders. I reached into my small clutch and applied a sharp, bold crimson lipstick, entirely erasing the pale, submissive ghost my family demanded me to be. I looked at myself one last time in the mirror. I did not see a victim. I saw an executioner preparing to swing the blade. I unlocked the powder room door and stepped back out into the grand foyer. Marcus was already waiting for me near the entrance to the main ballroom. He had completely shed the exhausted, beaten-down posture he had been forced to maintain all evening. He stood incredibly tall, his broad, muscular shoulders squared, and his dark eyes burning with a magnificent, righteous fire. The tailored charcoal suit he wore no longer looked like the uniform of a stressed architect begging for scraps. He looked like an absolute force of nature, a king preparing to reclaim his stolen kingdom. When his eyes locked onto me, a slow, genuine smile spread across his handsome face. He did not need to speak a single word. The silent, unbreakable bond we had forged in the darkest hours of our lives resonated between us. We had spent the last 4 days meticulously building the most flawless legal trap in corporate history. The federal authorities were already in position. The county sheriffs were mobilized. Everything was perfectly aligned in the shadows, and now it was time for us to step directly into the blinding light. Marcus extended his arm toward me, his stance radiating absolute protective strength. I looped my hand firmly through his, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, grounding me. We turned in perfect unison to face the massive closed double mahogany doors of the grand ballroom. The muffled sounds of the 12-piece string quartet and the obnoxious laughter of the city elite seeped through the thick wood. I reached out and placed my hand flat against the heavy brass door handle. With one massive synchronized push, Marcus and I shoved the grand double doors wide open. They hit the interior walls with a resounding, thunderous thud that instantly shattered the ambient noise of the gala. The sudden violent sound echoed off the high-vaulted ceilings, causing the string musicians to physically flinch. The cellist dragged his bow harshly across the strings, creating a sharp, discordant screech before the entire quartet completely stopped playing. The sudden, absolute silence in the massive room was deafening. Every single head turned simultaneously toward the entrance. Hundreds of wealthy socialites, corrupt real estate developers, and local politicians froze in place, their champagne flutes hovering midway to their lips. I stepped over the threshold and let the brilliant fractured light of the 3 massive crystal chandeliers wash completely over me. I did not shrink from their stares. I did not lower my eyes to the floor. I held my head impossibly high, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying power that filled every corner of the room. A collective wave of hushed, shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. These people were used to seeing Valerie, the quiet, dowdy sister who always stood awkwardly in the shadows, apologizing for her very existence. They had absolutely never seen the woman standing before them now. Marcus and I walked forward, our footsteps echoing in the total silence. The sea of elite guests instinctively parted for us, stepping backward and clearing a wide path down the center of the ballroom as if we were royalty, completely commanding their submission. Across the massive room, Patricia was still holding her crystal champagne flute, standing near the base of the stage where she had just delivered her incredibly arrogant farewell speech. When she saw me walking down the center aisle, her perfect practice smile instantly collapsed. The sophisticated, elegant mask she wore for society completely dissolved into a twisted, hideous expression of pure, furious indignation. The veins in her neck strained against her diamond choker, and her knuckles turned white as she gripped her glass. She thrust the champagne flute at a passing waiter so aggressively the liquid sloshed over the rim and stained the white tablecloth. Jessica materialized right beside her mother, her own smug expression dissolving into absolute confusion and sheer panicked outrage. Jessica stared at my emerald silk gown and the bold crimson lipstick, and I could physically see her mind short-circuiting. How dare I step into the light? How dare I look like a powerful equal in the exact room where they had gleefully planned to celebrate my total financial ruin? Patricia marched forward, shoving past the mayor and the city councilman, her heavy silk dress swishing aggressively. Jessica trailed closely behind her, her stolen diamond earrings swinging wildly. Patricia stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, her chest heaving with barely suppressed narcissistic rage. "What in the world do you think you are doing, Valerie?" She hissed, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper, meticulously calculated to stay just beneath the hearing of the closest guests. "You look absolutely ridiculous. You waltz in here 30 minutes before midnight dressed like you belong in this room, trying to draw attention away from your sister and me. It is incredibly pathetic, and you are embarrassing this entire family." Jessica crossed her arms, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. "You are completely unhinged, Valerie," she sneered, her eyes darting nervously toward Marcus, who stood completely stoic and unmoving beside me. "Marcus, what are you doing with her? Are you out of your mind? She's actively trying to ruin our corporate celebration. Get her out of here before she completely makes a fool of herself in front of the investors." I did not blink. I did not offer a single tear. I just looked at my mother and my sister, completely absorbing their desperate, transparent attempts to maintain their false superiority. For the first time in my life, I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of cold, absolute calm. They were throwing their usual toxic venom, but the words simply bounced off my armor. They had absolutely no power left over my mind. Patricia realized her quiet, vicious threats were completely failing to break me. She saw the icy, unyielding determination in my eyes, and a sudden flicker of genuine, raw fear finally crossed her perfectly contoured face. She panicked violently, resorting to the only weapon she thought she had left in her arsenal. She decided to publicly destroy me. "Security!" Patricia barked, raising her voice to a sharp, commanding volume that echoed brutally through the completely silent ballroom. 2 large, muscular men wearing dark suits and clear earpieces immediately stepped forward from the perimeter of the room. Patricia pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at my chest, her voice shifting into a loud, theatrical display of manufactured maternal distress. "Please escort my daughter out of the building immediately," she cried out, ensuring every single guest heard her lie. "She's currently experiencing a severe mental health episode, and she's violently trespassing on private property. She's deeply unwell, and she's trying to disrupt a private corporate event. Remove her before she hurts herself or someone else." The 2 security guards moved forward rapidly, their expressions tight and professional, preparing to grab my arms and physically drag me out of the room. Before they could even reach within 2 feet of me, Marcus stepped directly into their path, forming a solid, impenetrable wall of protective fury. He did not shout. He did not raise his hands. He simply locked eyes with the larger guard, his jaw set, and his massive shoulders squared. His entire posture broadcasted a clear, lethal warning that any man who attempted to touch me would be leaving the ballroom unconscious. The guards hesitated completely, unsure how to handle a highly dressed, unresisting woman protected by a man radiating such absolute, undeniable authority. I gently placed my hand on Marcus's shoulder, signaling him to hold his ground, but step aside. I stepped around him, directly facing the hesitating security team. I looked the head guard straight in the eyes. "I am not trespassing," I said, my voice low, smooth, and carrying the absolute unbreakable weight of the law. "And if you lay a single finger on me, you will be facing federal assault charges by sunrise." The guard swallowed hard, taking a slow, deliberate step backward and lowering his hands. The sheer, unbothered, terrifying confidence in my voice had completely paralyzed him. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic gasp of pure outrage, sputtering wildly, as her ultimate authority was entirely ignored in front of the entire city elite. "Valerie, She screeched, her sophisticated high society facade completely shattering into ugly, desperate panic. You have absolutely no right to be here. This is my house. This is my private event. Get out right now. I completely ignored her. I walked right past my screaming mother and my horrified sister, my emerald silk gown brushing softly against their legs. The wealthy guest stared in absolute stunned silence, watching a woman effortlessly dismantle the undisputed queen of Portland society without throwing a single punch. I walked purposefully toward the front of the room. My eyes locked completely on the raised bandstand where Patricia had just delivered her fraudulent farewell speech. I climbed the 3 short steps, my heels echoing sharply in the massive silent room. The string musicians were sitting frozen in their chairs, staring up at me in total shock. I walked directly to the center microphone stand. I wrapped my fingers around the cold silver metal and pulled the microphone free. A loud, sharp whine of feedback pierced the air, making several guests wince and physically cover their ears. I did not care. I looked out over the sea of horrified, wealthy faces. I found Patricia and Jessica standing frozen in the middle of the center aisle, their mouths hanging open in pure, unadulterated terror. They finally realized that they had lost complete control of the narrative. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive crystal chandelier, smooth, confident, and completely devastating. I have a toast, I announced, filling the entire estate with my absolute truth to the true owners of this estate. I held the cold silver microphone tightly in my hand. My voice echoed through the massive crystal chandeliers and bounced off the imported Italian marble walls. I have a toast to the true owners of this estate. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and completely suffocating. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the city, the mayor, the wealthy real estate developers, the elite socialites, were all staring directly at me. I stood on the raised bandstand in my emerald silk gown, projecting an aura of absolute unwavering authority. Down in the center aisle, Patricia and Jessica were completely frozen. Their champagne flutes hovered in midair, and their perfectly contoured faces were drained of every single drop of color. They looked like statues carved out of pure terror. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, and I delivered the final fatal blow. I know Patricia Carver just told you all about a massive new real estate acquisition. I said, my voice carrying a smooth conversational tone that masked the lethal precision of my words. She told you Carver Luxury Events was expanding its horizons and securing a multi-million-dollar legacy. But Patricia forgot to mention a few minor details to her esteemed investors tonight. She forgot to mention that the commercial property she is desperately trying to sell actually belongs to my 8-year-old daughter. She forgot to mention that she and my sister Jessica illegally forged my signature on federal banking documents to leverage a $2.5 million commercial loan against a grieving widow and an orphaned child. A collective gasp violently rippled through the crowded ballroom. A wealthy socialite standing near the ice sculpture dropped her crystal glass. It shattered loudly against the marble floor, but nobody even flined. Everyone was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the scandal unfolding in front of them. Patricia lunged forward, her silver sequined gown swishing frantically as she tried to reach the stage. "Turn off the microphone," she screamed at the audio technician standing near the speakers. "Turn it off right now, she's lying." I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at her with cold surgical detachment. "Do not come any closer, mother," I warned, my voice cutting through the air like a razor blade. "Or I will gladly start reading the exact routing numbers for your illegal offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands." Patricia stopped dead in her tracks. The crowd instinctively backed away from her, as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. I turned my attention to the horrified investors sitting in the front rows. The massive acquisition she boasted about tonight is actually a desperate criminal attempt to liquidate stolen property and flee the country, I explained, detailing the absolute reality of her fake empire. Because Patricia Carver does not own a single brick of this estate. She secretly cross-collateralized her residential mortgage with fraudulent commercial debt. Every single expensive appetizer you are eating tonight, every lavish flower arrangement you see, and every drop of vintage champagne you are drinking was paid for by stealing from a little girl's legally protected trust fund. I shifted my gaze to my sister. Jessica was shaking uncontrollably. Her hands flew up to clutch the massive, heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. And Jessica, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devastatingly clear, those diamonds look absolutely beautiful. It is a terrible shame you bought them by secretly siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars from your own husband's architectural firm. You bled a good, hard-working man completely dry to fund a pathetic illusion of wealth. You thought you were brilliant, but last night, you and Patricia eagerly signed a fake bridge loan contract that officially bound your personal social security numbers to the entire fraudulent enterprise. You literally signed your own federal confessions. Jessica let out a shrill, ear-piercing scream. The sophisticated high society mask she had worn her entire life completely dissolved into feral, raw panic. She spun around and lunged furiously at Marcus, her manicured hands raised like violent claws. "You set us up!" she shrieked, her face twisted in pure venom and disbelief. "You knew about this the whole time. You lied to us about the bridge loan. You trapped us." Marcus did not flinch. He did not step back. As Jessica charged at him, he stood like a solid stone wall, completely unmoving and incredibly powerful. He calmly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored charcoal suit. He pulled out a thick stack of folded legal documents and held them out, stopping her dead in her tracks. He looked down at the woman he had once loved with eyes entirely devoid of warmth or sympathy. "I did not lie about the bridge loan, Jessica," he said, his voice carrying the deep, resonating rumble of absolute finality. "You just did not bother to read the fine print because you were too blinded by your own greed. You and your mother legally swore under federal penalty that you orchestrated the entire fraud. And these are your official copies of the divorce papers, along with a comprehensive civil suit for corporate embezzlement. I am taking sole custody of our children tonight. You will never see a single dime of my money ever again." Jessica slapped the papers out of his hand, sobbing hysterically, as the thick documents scattered across the polished floor. She opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult, but a massive, booming voice echoed from the back of the ballroom, completely drowning her out. "Nobody move. Federal agents." The heavy oak double doors at the main entrance swung open with violent force. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets, spelling out FBI and IRS in bold yellow letters, flooded into the luxurious room. Local armed police officers flanked them instantly, securing every single exit and blocking the elevators. The wealthy elite guests scrambled backward, pressing themselves tightly against the walls to get out of the way of the tactical team. Special Agent Thomas Vance and Federal Prosecutor Sarah Jenkins walked straight down the center aisle, their eyes locked directly on Patricia and Jessica. Patricia tried to run. She picked up the heavy skirt of her silver sequined gown and took 2 desperate steps toward the side service door. A local police officer stepped immediately in front of her, blocking her path completely. Patricia Carver, Thomas Vance, announced, his voice projecting absolute authority over the chaotic room. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, federal wire fraud, forgery, and international money laundering." 2 federal agents grabbed Patricia's arms, roughly pulling them behind her back. The sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the quiet room. Patricia burst into ugly, hysterical tears. She begged the mayor for help. She pleaded with her real estate partners. But the wealthy elite simply turned their faces away, completely disgusted by the massive fraud standing in front of them. Their precious socialite queen was nothing but a common thief, and they wanted absolutely nothing to do with her toxic downfall. A few feet away, Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably as another federal agent secured handcuffs tightly around her wrists. The flashing red and blue lights from the dozens of police cruisers parked outside illuminated the grand windows, reflecting brightly off her stolen diamond necklace. Her reputation, her marriage, her fake wealth, everything she had built her toxic identity upon was instantly and completely vaporized in front of her entire social circle. She looked at Marcus, begging him silently for mercy, but he simply turned his back on her and walked toward the stage to stand beside me. Thomas Vance stopped right in front of my mother. Patricia was shaking violently, her expensive mascara running in dark, messy streaks down her face, completely destroying her perfect image. Thomas reached into his tactical jacket and pulled out the thick red folder I had secured from Silas Thorne that very afternoon. He held the document up so every single remaining guest could see it clearly. "Mrs. Carver," Thomas said, his tone completely devoid of any sympathy, "the federal government has placed a shadow freeze on all of your financial assets. Your offshore transfers have been permanently intercepted and cancelled. The money you thought you wired to the Cayman Islands does not exist. And pursuant to this emergency judicial order, you are being officially evicted from this property, effectively immediately. The true owner of this estate is reclaiming her stolen assets tonight. You do not own a single thing in this house. The local police marched my mother and my sister out the front doors in handcuffs, parading them in absolute disgrace in front of the entire Portland high society. I stood on the stage looking out over the empty space they left behind. I had spent my entire life shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I had let them convince me that family meant accepting constant abuse and protecting their toxic secrets. But standing there watching the police cruisers pull away into the freezing night, I realized the most profound truth of my entire life. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the most dangerous predators you will ever face. Setting boundaries does not mean you're betraying your family. It means you are finally choosing to protect yourself and the innocent people you love. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit your kindness, manipulate your trust, or steal your future. I took back my daughter's trust fund. I helped a good man escape a deeply parasitic marriage, and I completely reclaimed my own life on my own terms. If you are listening to this and you are carrying the heavy weight of a toxic family member who constantly makes you feel incredibly small, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not have to endure it. You have the power to step into the light, to gather your strength, and to build a life completely free from their manipulation. It is never too late to stop being the victim and start demanding the respect you completely deserve. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If my story resonated with you, if it gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps bring these stories to the people who desperately need to hear them. Do not forget to drop a comment below and let me know exactly where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single one. Remember, your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next story. The drive home from the country club felt like floating. The freezing rain had finally stopped leaving the Portland streets slick and shining under the amber glow of the streetlights. By the time I walked through my front door and checked on Maya, who was sleeping soundly in her bed, it was almost 2 a.m. The house was completely silent. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of fear or anticipation that I had been living with for the past 4 days. It was the rich, deep silence of absolute victory. I walked into the living room and struck a match lighting the logs I had stacked in the fireplace earlier that afternoon. The dry wood caught immediately, sending a warm, flickering orange light dancing across the walls. I went to the kitchen and boiled water, pouring myself a large mug of chamomile tea. I carried the steaming mug back to the living room and sank into the deep cushions of my armchair, pulling a soft woven blanket over my lap. I just sat there for a long time watching the flames consume the wood, feeling the tension completely drain out of my muscles. Everything was over. The nightmare was officially finished. On the heavy oak coffee table, right next to my tea, my smartphone began to vibrate. The sudden harsh buzzing rattled against the wood. I did not jump. I did not panic. I simply turned my head and looked at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a single word: Mom. I watched the screen light up the dark room, buzzing relentlessly for a full minute, before it finally stopped and went black. 5 seconds later, it lit up again. The violent, rhythmic vibrations started all over again. Patricia was calling from a holding cell at the downtown precinct. I took a slow sip of my hot tea, letting the soothing liquid warm my throat. I pictured her sitting on a hard concrete bench, her silver sequined gown confiscated, her expensive jewelry locked in an evidence bag. I pictured her shivering in a sterile holding cell, surrounded by the harsh fluorescent lights of reality. She was completely stripped of her power, her money, and her fabricated prestige. She was finally experiencing the exact terror she had tried to inflict on me and my daughter. The phone stopped ringing and then immediately started again. The counter on my screen updated with every single frantic attempt. 10 missed calls, 15 missed calls, 20 missed calls. She was wearing out her one phone call allowance, desperately trying to reach the daughter she had completely discarded. She honestly believed that if she just kept calling, her sheer force of will would eventually break me down. She thought the old Valerie, the weak, submissive girl who was terrified of her mother's rage, would pick up the phone crying and apologizing for causing a scene. She thought she could still manipulate me into calling the federal prosecutor and begging for leniency. 25 missed calls, 28 missed calls, 29 missed calls. I set my tea down on a coaster and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I watched the number 29 sit on the screen. The relentless vibrating finally stopped. A profound, heavy silence settled back over the living room, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. Then a single notification chime pierced the quiet. A text message banner dropped down from the top of the screen. I picked up the phone, swiping to open the message. The sheer, unadulterated desperation radiating from the text was palpable. "Please do not do this, Valerie. Please. We have absolutely nothing left. They took everything. They are going to put us in federal prison. You have to call them and drop the charges right now. I am your mother. Please help me." I read the words slowly, analyzing every single pathetic syllable. We have absolutely nothing left. She wanted me to feel pity for her. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of guilt for destroying my own family. But as I stared at the glowing letters, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold surgical detachment. She did not have nothing because of me. She had nothing because she built her entire existence on a foundation of theft and fraud. She had tried to steal my daughter's future, to buy luxury cars and fund offshore accounts. She had tried to frame an innocent man and leave him to rot in a federal facility just so she could sip cocktails on a tropical beach. She had spent my entire life making sure I knew I was worthless. Now she was begging the worthless daughter for salvation. The federal agents had already confirmed that the charges were entirely out of my hands anyway. You cannot just drop federal wire fraud and grand larceny charges because you change your mind. The government had all the evidence, the forged signatures, the offshore routing numbers, and the recorded confessions. Patricia and Jessica belonged to the United States justice system now. But Patricia did not need to know that. She needed to sit in that freezing concrete cell and realize that the ultimate power over her fate belonged entirely to the woman she had abused for 3 decades. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the digital keyboard. I did not write a long paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not type out a list of all the ways she had hurt me. She did not deserve my emotional energy, and she certainly did not deserve my closure. I kept my response incredibly brief, entirely devoid of any sympathy or familial warmth. I typed out a single sentence that would echo in her mind for the rest of her miserable life behind bars. "You had better start praying." I hit send, watching the small blue bubble appear on the screen. The delivery confirmation popped up a second later. I did not wait for her frantic reply. I tapped the information icon next to her name, scrolled to the very bottom of the screen, and pressed the red button labeled "Block this caller." I confirmed the action and watched as her contact profile vanished into the digital void. I went to Jessica's contact and did the exact same thing, completely severing their access to my life permanently. I set the phone back down on the coffee table face down. The silence that followed was not just the absence of noise. It was the absence of a lifetime of manipulation, fear, and control. It was the most beautiful, perfect silence I had ever experienced. I leaned back in my chair, picking up my mug of tea and taking a long, slow sip. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last lingering shadows of the Carver family legacy. Maya was safe in her bed, her future completely secure and fiercely protected. Marcus was free to rebuild his life and his business without the toxic anchor of my sister dragging him under. And I was finally, undeniably free. If you have made it to the very end of this journey with me, I want to ask you a serious question. Have you ever had to permanently close the door on someone you once loved because their toxicity was destroying your peace? Have you ever had to choose your own survival over the expectations of your family? It is the hardest decision you will ever make, but it is also the most necessary. Please drop a comment below and share your story with me. I want to know where you are watching this from and what time it is right now in your part of the world. Building boundaries is not an act of cruelty or betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. Sometimes the villains in our lives share our last name, and the only way to win is to stop playing their twisted game. Thank you so much for being here, for listening to my truth, and for supporting this channel. Please hit that like button and subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories of strength, resilience, and absolute justice. You deserve a life full of peace, and you have the power to create it. Until next time, take care of yourself and never be afraid to protect your own light. 6 months have passed since the New Year Eve gala that completely shattered Portland high society. The legal fallout was swift and absolutely devastating. I worked directly with the federal prosecutors and Silas Thorne to completely dismantle the fraudulent empire my mother and sister had built. Once the commercial property was legally cleared of Patricia and her forged liens, I sold the land to a legitimate developer. It was a massive multi-million-dollar acquisition, but this time every single cent was legally documented and completely secured. That money went straight into an ironclad, untouchable trust fund for my daughter. The future of my daughter, Maya, is completely safe. She will never have to worry about anything, and she will never have to depend on the toxic scraps of a narcissistic family. Marcus filed for full custody of his children the very morning after the raid. With Jessica facing multiple federal indictments, the family court judge did not even hesitate. Marcus granted her absolutely nothing in the divorce. He completely severed his architectural firm from Carver Luxury Events, washing away the toxic rot Jessica had injected into his life work. His business is thriving now, completely free from the parasite that was draining him dry. He still comes over for dinner every Sunday evening. He has become a wonderful protective uncle to Maya. We survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable, and we walked out of the wreckage as a true chosen family. As for Patricia and Jessica, they are currently sitting in a federal detention center awaiting their sentencing hearings. The federal prosecutor was absolutely ruthless. The wire fraud, the identity theft, the massive bank forgery, it all compounded into a mountain of irrefutable evidence. They plead guilty because they had absolutely no other choice. The judge froze every single asset they owned. The mansion was seized, the luxury cars were repossessed, and their offshore accounts were completely dismantled. They went from wearing custom diamonds and sipping vintage champagne to wearing standard-issue prison uniforms with absolutely $0 to their names. They are facing up to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. They lost their wealth, they lost their freedom, and they lost their entire reputation. I am standing in the kitchen of my new home right now, pouring a cup of coffee and watching the bright morning light flood through the massive bay windows. It is a beautiful, spacious house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. I look out into the backyard and see my 8-year-old daughter Maya running through the green grass, laughing as she chases our new golden retriever. Her smile is so incredibly bright and completely free of the heavy dark shadow that used to hang over our lives. The toxic roots that almost choked the life out of us have been completely and permanently severed. We are safe. We are happy. We are finally entirely free. If you are listening to this right now, I want you to really hear what I'm about to say. For 34 years, I truly believed that I had to earn my place in my own family. I thought that if I just stayed quiet, if I accommodated their endless demands, if I just made myself incredibly small, they would eventually learn to love me. I thought blood meant absolute loyalty. I thought blood meant you had to tolerate the disrespect, the blatant favoritism, and the quiet cruelties just to keep the peace. But I learned the absolute hardest way possible that blood means absolutely nothing when it is tied to greed. My own mother and sister looked at me and saw nothing but a resource to exploit. They looked at my beautiful, innocent, adopted daughter and saw an obstacle they could easily discard. They were completely willing to destroy an innocent, hard-working man and steal a child's entire future just to fund their fake, luxurious lifestyle. They did not care about the damage they caused because they believed their bloodline gave them the ultimate right to consume the people around them. But here is the absolute truth that completely changed my life and gave me the strength to fight back. Family is not defined by the people who share your blood but treat you like a burden. Family is defined by the people who stand in front of your child when the world gets cruel. Family is defined by the people who protect your peace, who validate your worth, and who never ask you to shrink yourself to make them feel powerful. Marcus became my family the moment he stood like a solid wall between me and the security guards my mother hired. My daughter is my family because her pure, innocent love gave me the absolute courage to burn down a corrupt empire. You do not owe your abusers your silence. You do not owe toxic people your presence simply because you share a last name. You have the absolute fundamental right to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served. You have the right to build a massive, beautiful life completely free from the people who only ever wanted to see you fail. You are not weak for setting strict boundaries. You are incredibly, terrifyingly strong. If you have ever had to sever ties with toxic blood relatives to protect your peace, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Please tell me your story in the comments if you have ever faced an ultimate betrayal from your own family, and do not forget to let me know what state you are watching from today. I read every single comment, and your stories give me incredible strength. Building a new life from the ashes of betrayal is the hardest thing you will ever do, but I promise you the absolute peace waiting on the other side is worth every single difficult step. Until next time, remember your boundaries are your armor. Take care of yourself.